Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. So Ask followed the mother and daughter to Gray's home. But as soon as they sat down, Magdalena found an excuse to send Gray out for a bit. Ask, quietly watching, saw Magdalena close the door. That gentle expression from earlier vanished, replaced by one of deep reverence and sorrow. She knelt before Ask like a devout believer in prayer. If my instincts aren't mistaken, you're the noble Holy Mother, aren't you? Magdalena lowered her head deeply, speaking words that could shake anyone who heard them. Ask remained seated, unmoving, silently gazing down at the kneeling woman. If you would allow it. Please, save that child. Must the king's vessel really be Gray? Her voice trembled with grief as she bowed low, earnestly pleading. Before I answer, why don't you tell me why you're saying this to me? Ask's instincts told her. Magdalena was hiding a secret that no one else in the village knew. Chapter 103, Lord Elmeloy II arrived in Blackmore village on the afternoon of the second day after Shiomi and the others. Roughly the same time as the previous day. Second. When Lord Elmeloy II followed the map to the village entrance, Shiomi, who had been talking with Bursk, stood up from the signpost and greeted him. Shiomi. Seeing his reaction, Lord Elmeloy II was certain Shiomi had already gotten a good grasp of the village's situation. That's why he was waiting here. He glanced at the old man standing next to Shiomi. This was Bursk, the gravekeeper of Blackmore village, and the very person Lord Elmeloy II had come all the way to see. The reason was simple, he wanted to participate in the 5th Holy Grail War. But as a magus, his abilities were limited. Having witnessed the war's brutality firsthand, he needed allies. The gravekeeper of Blackmore specialized in magecraft involving spirits. That was precisely why Lord Elmeloy II sought his help. After all, servants were higher-order spirits, making them potentially vulnerable to someone like the gravekeeper. Did you come alone? Shiomi asked. Reins got tied up by the 2 girls at your place. Lord Elmeloy II tugged at his collar. That was your doing, wasn't it? Shiomi raised an eyebrow. Had to. I told Reins where you were going, remember? I'd lose sleep if I didn't offer some compensation. Anyway, you've been a huge help, Lord Elmeloy II said. In truth, Sakura and Karin alone probably couldn't stall Reins. What really mattered was that this visit to the village was something Lord Elmeloy II was undertaking together with Shiomi. With someone that powerful by his side, Reins, who didn't want her toy to break, finally gave up on tailing him to investigate. So, what about you? Your wife didn't come? Lord Elmeloy II asked. It was about 7 years ago, during Shiomi's visit to the clock tower for official business, that Lord Elmeloy II discovered the Berserker had not disappeared after the Holy Grail War. Instead, she had remained in the world through a new contract, continuing to exist as a familiar. This made Lord Elmeloy II all the more aware of his own limitations. Even if he had wanted the King of Conquerors to remain, his own magical energy would never have been enough to sustain it outside the Holy Grail War. She's exploring the village, Shiomi replied. But she and I took the Hunter's Lodge on the outskirts, so you'll have to rough it at the church tonight. Lord Elmeloy II turned to Bursk. If things go well, we could leave as early as tomorrow. You must be Lord Elmeloy II, the one Mr. Shiomi mentioned was coming to see me, Bursk said. That's right, Lord Elmeloy II confirmed. Mr. Shiomi has already given me a rough idea of what this is about, Bursk said frankly. But before we discuss that, there are a few matters that need handling first. Once those are settled, we can talk. The unexpected reply caught Lord Elmeloy II slightly off guard. But Bursk had already walked off, apparently to make preparations, leaving just Shiomi and Lord Elmeloy II at the village entrance. Shiomi took up the role of guide and led him into the village. What exactly are you planning? On the way, Lord Elmeloy II finally asked. Before deciding to come to Blackmore village, he had done all the research he could. He already knew the villagers revered King Arthur. He also learned that some kind of ceremony related to King Arthur was taking place here. That alone wasn't too concerning. Lord Elmeloy too had no intention of interfering with the customs or faiths of a distant land. He was only here to ask a favor. But the issue was, the person who came with Shiomi couldn't exactly be considered an outsider. Morgan, the Witch of Britain. According to Lord Elmeloy II's research, the village's earliest King Arthur beliefs and their foundation were closely tied to the shadow of Arthurian legend. Morgan the Witch. Lord Elmeloy II, what do you think of a belief that has lasted for over 1,000 years, yet has never shown any clear signs? Shiomi asked, turning the question back on him. Lord Elmeloy II rubbed his chin, his instincts as a scholar kicking in. Belief is something born in the wake of miracles. But with the retreat of the Age of Gods, the mysteries have withdrawn into even deeper obscurity. In such a situation, if a belief shows no manifestation from the moment it was founded, then over a millennium, it's bound to fade. Until only a handful of those who know the truth still care. Exactly. Shiomi nodded. The same goes for this village. They've upheld a mission passed down for over 1,000 years, without any clear direction or signs. It should have long crumbled into dust with time. But something altered that course. The Fourth Holy Grail War. Lord Elmeloy II caught on immediately. Of course he would. Having participated in it himself and come face to face with legendary heroic spirits, it was unforgettable. Especially since King Arthur had appeared as a servant. Because of Arthurian Pendragon's appearance, a tradition long maintained in this village finally underwent something like a divine transformation, Shiomi said, eyes on the church that was growing larger in their view. Right now, the villagers are quietly and methodically carrying out the ritual. What exactly is this ritual about? Lord Elmeloy II asked. With little information and only just arriving, he had no choice but to ask Shiomi, who'd gotten here ahead of him. To resurrect King Arthur. Shiomi lowered his voice, careful not to be overheard by the passing villagers. Lord Elmeloy II stopped in front of the church door. What? You think there's something off about it too, right? Shiomi gave a wry smile and sighed. That's why she decided to bring it all to an end. There was no need to say who she was. She's the one who set this in motion, so it's only fitting that she's the one to end it. Lord Elmeloy II's face was solemn. Makes sense. Still, it's hard not to feel like 1,000 years have gone in circles. You'll have to ask her that yourself. Shiomi feigned a light tone, masking how much he really knew. Because it wasn't that simple at all. Since you're telling me this, I assume you've made the necessary preparations in under a day, Lord Elmeloy II said as he followed Shiomi into the church. Shiomi nodded. The Gravekeeper, and even the Holy Church, have already given silent approval to our next move. Chapter 104, it was the morning of the third day after Shiomi and Esk arrived in Blackmoor village. The two of them met Lord Elmeloy II in the church chapel. So, you're not planning to object after all? Esk asked with a smile. Lord Elmeloy II's eye twitched. Though the pair in front of him appeared friendly, he felt as if he were staring down a pair of terrifying demons. I could easily say I'm against this, citing the importance of not interfering with local customs, he sighed deeply. But if I did, I'd probably find myself waking up back home in London the moment I finished saying it. Smart man, Shiomi said, leaning against one of the chapel chairs. It'd be a real pain to send you back. If you can at least keep quiet about it, that's good enough. Lord Elmeloy II sat up and looked at the two. So, are we heading out now? Just the two of you should be enough to deal with things here, right? Not quite. A new voice cut in from behind the door. It was Sister Illumia, who slowly stepped out from the chapel, stopping beneath the black statue of the Virgin on the altar. The Holy Church is keeping the building sealed during this time to avoid attracting the villagers' attention. After all, even Magi can't go around slaughtering locals. That would make both the Mages Association and the Holy Church put a price on your heads, wouldn't it? Shiomi gave a small smile and nodded. As a former sealing designation executor, he knew all too well how dangerous it was to violate the rule of secrecy. Unless the troublemaker was a full-blown menace to society. In which case, the rules were another story. Besides, there's one more person who needs to come with us, Esk added. The Gravekeeper of Blackmoor isn't just someone who tends graves. He's the one who safeguarded King Arthur's tomb for generations. Just as she finished speaking, the chapel door creaked open, and a hooded girl stepped inside. Mr. Bursk told me to come here, Gray said timidly. Sister Illumia's expression softened back to her usual demeanor. The ones you're meeting are already here, Gray. No one from the village stopped you on the way, right? No, they didn't. Gray shook her head. The villagers had treated her with the same respectful attitude as always, greeting her politely and chatting with her. Still, she didn't really understand why Mr. Bursk had asked her to come to the church. He only said it was important, and that she had to bring Ed with her. The moment she saw Esk, Gray's anxiety eased. She had a faint idea that this had something to do with her, and quietly decided to trust the lady before her. That's good. Close the door and come in, Illumia said. There are traveling merchants in the village today, so no one will be paying attention to this side of town. If you're ready, you can head out. Even so, the fact that she had just asked Gray to shut the chapel door made her pause in confusion. Leave the rest to me, Shiomi said. He walked toward a side door opposite the one he and Illumia had entered through. It was clear he had already mapped out the route, and Lord El Meloy too followed closely behind. At that moment, Esk extended her hand to Gray. Gray. Yes. Realizing what was happening, Gray quickly took her arm. Just as she had done the day before while showing Morgan around. And followed the two ahead of her. They passed through the side door, turned down a hallway, and arrived at a storeroom stocked with wine and bread. The church's supply for communion. Shiomi moved one of the shelves aside with practiced ease and lifted the carpet underneath. Pressing a specific spot on the floor, a section of it rose up and slid aside. Beneath it was an empty chamber and a flight of rough, unpaved steps leading down. There's actually a secret passage under the church, Lord El Meloy too murmured. I really shouldn't underestimate your social skills. You managed to get this information so quickly. Leading the way, Shiomi replied, you need different approaches with different people. When dealing with the Holy Church, it's best to be direct. Make your intentions clear, and focus on the mutual benefits, especially those that favor the church. That's the fastest way to gain their cooperation. Even so. Lord El Meloy too shook his head, unable to hide his admiration. The tunnel's dirt walls weren't reinforced. It looked like someone had dug it out and left it as is. The damp soil clinging to the walls added a sense of claustrophobia and pressure to the already narrow space. Not exactly the most comfortable, Esk remarked from the rear. Then, as if a switch had flipped, the stagnant air began to circulate. A breeze brushed against them, replacing the musty staleness with a crisp, fresh scent. A single, casual phrase was all it took. No incantation, no chant. The air-purifying spell was complete. Fresh air alone isn't enough. Shiomi snapped his fingers. 4 glowing orbs of light floated beside each of them, lighting up the underground corridor. A pang of frustration hit Lord El Meloy too. If he had cast such a basic spell, he would have needed a proper chant. If it were the person behind him, that was understandable. They played on a different level entirely. But Shiomi was a modern magus like him, and that made the difference harder to swallow. Still, there wasn't much time to wallow in self-pity. The illuminated path ahead revealed countless footprints worn into the earth. Seeing the marks left by generations of pilgrims, Gray couldn't help but let out a soft gasp. Is this the real church? Or was the church built just to conceal this place? Her heart pounded. This was the true face of the village. But Gray had lived here for 15 years and never known. Don't be afraid, Gray, Esk's cool voice echoed through the tunnel. Beyond here lies only the abyss of death. If fear grips your heart, then take my hand. I will be your strength. The voice was gentle, calm, but carried an undeniable authority that reached straight into the soul. In that moment, Gray realized. The woman holding her hand wasn't just some noble lady. She was more like a queen. In the past, many cultures believed the underworld was located underground, Lord El Meloy too said, perhaps to ease the tension. Some called it the underworld, some the netherworld. Others referred to it as the realm of the dead or the land of shadows. Whatever the name, the realm of the dead borders our own. If you're willing, it's a place you can walk into. Shiomi let out a low, non-committal hum. I can't speak for the others. But the land of shadows, unlike the underworld, is more of the realm of death itself. Perpetually overcast, no day or night, devoid of all life, except for. Chapter 105, except for. Lord El Meloy too caught Shiomi's abrupt pause and questioned him. Realizing he'd said too much, Shiomi simply smiled and shook his head. Nothing. There's nothing there. Not the living, not the dead. It almost sounds like you've seen it for yourself, Lord El Meloy too remarked casually. He still remembered the 2 red spears Shiomi wielded. Clearly akin to the cursed spears of Celtic myth like the Gaibolg. Shiomi must have discovered them in some hidden place, known to no one. That, Lord El Meloy too reasoned, might explain why Shiomi had such a distinct understanding of the land of shadows. Still, it was barely enough to count as a scholarly disagreement. Lord El Meloy too had no intention of debating something so casually mentioned. But anyway, the spiritual density here is no joke, Shiomi said, changing the topic. And that's not all. The spirit's desires are overwhelmingly clear. That urge to ravage everything. He deliberately added that last comment. Gray, still holding Esk's hand, looked at his back in surprise. As the next gravekeeper trained by Bursk, Gray possessed exceptional talent when it came to spirits. She had sensed the ominous atmosphere of the underground space clearly. But she hadn't expected Shiomi to notice it too. And there's barely any magical resistance, Esk added. This must be the grave tied to Artoria. More or less, Shiomi replied. He and Lord Delmeloitu picked up their pace, while Esk and Gray trailed just behind at a more relaxed speed. Madam, what did you and my mother talk about yesterday? Gray finally had the chance to ask. Yesterday, after Esk had been invited into their home, Gray was sent out on an errand by her mother. Ever since Gray's appearance had changed, her once loving mother had grown fanatical, like the rest of the villagers. Worshipful and distant. So when her mother ordered her around like she used to, Gray had felt strangely happy. Without thinking, she'd done exactly as she was told. But by the time she returned, Esk was already gone. Her mother had said nothing, her attitude back to how it was before, offering no explanation at all. You'll understand soon enough, Esk said calmly. It was another evasive answer, and Gray felt a little disheartened. But the warmth and smooth firmness of the hand holding hers told her she could still trust this lady. They weren't far behind Shiomi and Lord Elmeloitu. Together, the group reached the end of the underground passage and stepped into a massive subterranean chamber. Its size was comparable to the Great Grail's chamber in Fuiuki. Even more striking was the number of bones littering the area. Not just one or two, but dozens, hundreds. Human remains lay everywhere, blanketing the floor to the point that there wasn't even a spot left to step. Just as Esk had said, this must be the true grave of Blackmore. No. Can this really be called a grave? Lord Elmeloitu muttered. Even the clock towers underground hold special properties. The subterranean world differs from the surface. Crystallized remnants of mystery still linger. If the same applies here. He clutched his chin, swallowing hard as he mumbled to himself. Unfortunately, there's no time for further analysis, Lord Elmeloi, Shiomi suddenly cut in. Huh? He looked up, just in time to see the atmosphere change. Bones across the chamber began to rise, as if lifted by invisible threads. One after another, they floated upward and assembled into skeletal warriors. They stood tall, grasping weapons made from bone. Swords, spears, bows. Like soldiers from an ancient battlefield. No wonder there was no trace of mana. These things have devoured it all, Shiomi said. One of the skeletal soldiers lunged at him, slashing with a sword. Gray hurriedly reached under her cloak for the cage, ready to summon Ad. But what she saw next froze her in place. Tenkai Shiomi casually produced a black spear out of thin air. And with a single sweep, shattered the skeletal warrior into pieces that scattered across the floor. Oh my, such a warm welcome, Shiomi said with complete composure. Too bad I'm more than familiar with skeleton soldiers by now. The magical spear in his hand belonged to Esk. Since Esk had consistently advised against using the soaring spear of piercing death, the two had established a new contract. With just a thought, the weapon would appear in his grasp. Still as terrifyingly efficient as ever, Lord Elmeloitu muttered, lips tightening. Skeleton soldiers continued to swarm them. Concerned, Gray summoned Ad, which transformed into a massive scythe to assist in battle. But when she blocked an incoming strike, the force of the blow sent a painful numbness through her arms. These skeletons were nothing like they looked. Far from fragile, and not something that would fall in a single hit. As she watched Shiomi mow through them effortlessly, Gray silently moved to the front of the remaining two, focusing on defending against any who tried to slip past. But the relentless onslaught quickly wore her down. Just as a skeleton soldier found an opening and lunged for her life, a bolt of light flew past her back and blasted the creature apart. Startled, Gray turned to see Esk raising her hand effortlessly, as if lifting a teacup. From her fingertips, tiny bursts of light, each no larger than a grain of wheat, shot out like bullets from an automatic weapon. The skeletal soldiers closing in were all torn apart. Gray flushed and pulled her hood lower, burying her face in embarrassment. Maybe she really was the weakest one here. These people didn't need her protection. Perhaps Mr. Bursk had brought her along for reasons other than being a bodyguard. So these are the rejects. Failures that never became proper servants. With enough of them, even defective spirit origins become a nuisance, Esk said, lowering her hand slowly. Yeah, but it looks like the one in charge here wasn't planning to sit back and let me clean them all up, Shiomi replied. As he spoke, his spear swept out, the force of the swing sending a blast of air that cut down a row of skeleton soldiers in one stroke. He had already noticed a figure behind the wave of undead. A girl stood there, like a queen overseeing her flood army of pseudo-servants. Her face was hidden behind a golden mask. Why have you come here? She asked quietly. The time is not yet right. The future king has yet to awaken. You walk the surface. I remain below. We should each wait in our rightful place. She ignored Shiomi and Esk entirely, speaking directly to Gray. After delivering what sounded like a warning, the masked girl turned and began walking deeper into the cavern. Go back. Those were her final words. Chapter 106, Wait. Gray instinctively called out, trying to stop the masked girl and ask more. But before she could, another wave of skeleton soldiers surged forward, surrounding the group. They were deep in an underground cavern. While it had held steady for centuries, that durability depended on normal conditions. Neither Shiomi nor Esk would have trouble wiping out the undead, but using Grand Magecraft here would trigger a collapse, bringing down not just this chamber but the entire church above it. The aftermath would expose everything. The whole village would be thrown into chaos. So Esk focused on holding the undead at bay with precise, defensive spells, while Shiomi handled the rest from the opposite side. Esk. Shiomi suddenly shouted. I'm sending these broken souls back to their world. Esk hesitated, then pulled Gray close. The girl stumbled back, leaning against her. At the same time, Lord Elmeloy too also retreated behind Esk, now enveloped within the barrier she had cast. The skeleton soldiers struck with their weapons. But their blows hit the barrier like steel against invisible glass, ringing out with dull, useless impacts. On the other side, Shiomi lifted his spear overhead, spun it once, and slammed it into the ground. Open, gate. A shimmering, spectral door began to materialize. As it opened, a blinding white light burst forth, too intense to look at directly. A cold wind laced with death swept through. Gray and Lord Elmeloy too both felt it. Without Esk's protection, their life force would have been stripped away in an instant, leaving them as fresh corpses on the floor. When the light finally faded, Gray slowly opened her eyes. The ground was still covered in bones, just as before. No room even to step. But this time, she was sure, these bones would never rise again. No more waves. No more attacks. In the vast silence of the cavern, only Shiomi remained standing. He leaned on his spear, silent. After a brief pause, he finally lifted the weapon and walked toward them. What was that just now? Lord Elmeloy too asked, curiosity unmistakable. He had always thought of Tenkai Shiomi as a walking grimoire. Always able to pull out some impossible magecraft when least expected. Just a large-scale anti-spirit spell, Shiomi said, brushing dust from his clothes like it was nothing. Lord Elmeloy too rubbed his chin. You've even mastered spirit-based magecraft. No, I suppose that was to be expected. He wasn't surprised. Talented mages always had more than one specialty. And Shiomi was no exception. Esk snapped her fingers, and the protective barrier slowly faded away. Not bad, she said quietly. It's all right, Shiomi replied, resisting the urge to scratch his head. Strictly speaking, what he'd done wasn't proper magecraft. It was more like tearing open a small rift between the shadow realm and the real world. Just enough to suck in wandering undead. It wouldn't work on servants. It couldn't affect anything but the dead. And anyone alive caught in it without protection would have their mana and life drained in seconds. Most importantly, it only worked in places with a connection to the shadow realm. This underground crypt, for example, had been constructed as a replica of the underworld. Only after centuries of accumulation did it begin to mirror that realm's properties. In short, it was a crude magical imitation of another noble phantasm held by his master. Shiomi wasn't the true master of that domain. This was the best he could do. Once he realized that during the battle, he acted immediately. Esk didn't comment on his choice. She knew better than to ask him to abandon something he'd spent years mastering. Just feeling a small twinge of jealousy was enough. She had no interest in being laughed at someday by a woman who might not even be that much older than her. But really, I didn't expect to run into Artoria's spirit, Esk sighed. What a well-laid plan. Lord Elmeloy too's eyes widened in realization. So it's King Arthur's spirit. That explains everything. He looked down at Gray. Her hood had been blown back by the wind, and she hadn't had a chance to pull it up again. Now, he finally understood the meaning behind that face, identical to Artoria's. This girl, raised as the next Gravekeeper, was the body. The three components that make up a person. Body, spirit, and soul. Any two alone aren't enough to form a complete human being, Shiomi nodded. And that's especially true for legendary heroes. But, at that moment, he stole a glance at Esk. As a familiar bound by a renewed contract to remain in the world, Esk could maintain a physical form. But it wasn't a true body, only a temporary construct held together by magical energy. When that energy ran dry, the form would vanish. The thought that he had spent years sharing a bed with her made Shiomi feel awkwardly self-conscious. It was enough to make it difficult to meet Esk's gaze while talking about such things. Gray, you should already know this. Your clan was raised as vessels for King Arthur's body, Shiomi continued. But only you resonated with the soul of the manifested King Arthur during the Holy Grail War 9 years ago. That's what caused the transformation of your body and appearance. Gray pressed her lips together and gave a quiet nod. She didn't know much about this so-called Holy Grail War, but she understood what the changes in her meant. But just a few days later, King Arthur's soul disappeared with the end of the war, Xiaomi went on. The Holy Church didn't have time to confirm anything. That's why your face mirrors hers, but your hair stayed the same. A replicated spirit of King Arthur. A flawless body, prepared to house that spirit. And finally, the summoned soul of King Arthur. With all three, body, spirit, and soul, combined, the resurrection of King Arthur, Artoria Pendragon, would be complete. But if Artoria ever found out about this, Xiaomi said, shaking his head, she'd definitely be the first to reject it. That king never cared about herself. Her only concern was Britannia. And this world. At that, Lord Elmeloy too remembered something else. Even if all three components are gathered, Grey still has her own soul and spirit inside her. If we can't extract them without harming the body, this is probably what we'd need. Esk extended her hand, revealing a golden dagger. Chapter 107. It was a sharp dagger with a curved blade, and in the dim light of the underground cavern, illuminated only by a few illumination spells, it gleamed with a dazzling golden brilliance. If one had to compare it, it resembled the kind of exquisite artifact you'd expect to find in the treasury of the heroic king, Gilgamesh. What is that? Asked Lord Elmeloy too. Esk twirled the golden dagger lightly in her hand. Erosion, penetrating blade of gold. Though it's not the one kept by this village. Lord Elmeloy too could tell at a glance. The magical energy radiating from the erosion, golden fang was unmistakably that of a noble phantasm. Judging by Esk's demeanor, it must have been something that hadn't seen much use in the Holy Grail War. Likely because it wasn't suited for battlefield deployment. Each time she turned the blade, light refracted off it with a blinding flash. The sight sent a chill down Grey's spine. Something deep inside her warned her to keep her distance from that dagger. Even knowing that Esk had no intention of pointing it at the vessel meant for King Arthur, Grey couldn't suppress the instinctive fear. To be honest, when I spoke with Bursk Blackmore today about what we were planning to do, he told me something rather shocking, Xiaomi said flatly. This village has secretly been divided into two factions for a very long time. Huh? Grey blinked, stunned. These two sides hold completely different beliefs and missions, Xiaomi continued, crouching to examine the bones scattered across the floor. One side is the Blackmore family, descended from Bursk himself. They're magus whose role is to guide souls. They've lived here since before the Common Era. That's also where the village's name comes from. He turned to Grey and offered a bitter smile. The other faction has long prayed for the resurrection of King Arthur. They worship both King Arthur and the Black Madonna. Grey's heart sank a little. She had lived in this village for 15 years. The villagers had always been kind to her. She'd never imagined that this place, with fewer than 100 people, wasn't unified. Ah, but don't let it get to you, Grey, Xiaomi added. While there are two factions, most villagers don't belong to either. Even though many are now working toward reviving King Arthur, the Gravekeepers still choose successors from among them. And there are also devout believers in the Black Madonna within the village. The goals of the Gravekeepers and those who seek Arthur's return aren't fundamentally opposed. That's why the two sides have coexisted. Distant, suspicious of each other, but living side by side. He let out a sigh. As for the Holy Church, once they discovered the Black Madonna's worship here, they connected her with their own Virgin Mary and used that link to establish a presence in the village. So, in truth, there weren't just two sides, but three. Three factions, each watching the others, each using that balance to remain embedded in the village. Impressive that you managed to gain the support of two of them, Lord Elmeloy too said with a sigh. Political maneuvering wasn't his strength. Those responsibilities had always fallen to Rains, despite her youth. Compared to him, Kenneth, who could handle multiple disciplines and navigate politics, was someone he couldn't help but admire more and more. At its core, politics is just building allies and reducing enemies, Xiaomi said with a small smile. Given our current objective, the Gravekeepers and the Church are both willing to let it happen. Only that last faction won't accept it under any circumstances. He glanced back at the dagger in Esk's hand. Still, nothing I heard from Bursk or the Church ever mentioned that dagger, Xiaomi added. Esk pulled back her hood and slipped the blade beneath her cloak. I learned of it from someone else. As she said this, she cast a glance at Grey. And Xiaomi immediately understood. Earlier that day, Esk had stopped by Grey's house. Whatever she'd learned, it must have come from there. In truth, the village elder, head of the community, did keep a similar dagger, one left by the Black Madonna for use in the resurrection ritual when the time came. But the one in Esk's hand was her own. Perhaps it was a relic that mirrored its counterpart. Two versions of the same thing, passed down in different hands by two people who were alike, but not the same. No matter the side, they each held something nearly identical. Erosion was originally forged to sever mistletoe. It can cut not just flesh, but the very seams between body, spirit, and soul, Esk explained. The dagger kept in the village is meant to be used once Grey's body fully synchronizes with Artoria's. Stab it into her, and forcibly extract the soul and spirit. That way, only an empty vessel would remain, ready to receive the artificial spirit already prepared. Once Artoria's soul came into contact with that vessel, incarnation would occur naturally. Revival, complete. But at that moment, the girl named Grey would vanish from the world. What a twisted plan. Honestly, they'd be better off just using the Holy Grail to wish Arthur back to life, Shiomi muttered, clicking his tongue. I really wonder how Artoria would react if she saw this. She'd reject it outright, of course. That woman gave up on saving Britannia and walked away quietly to Avalon, Esk said, lifting the hem of her cloak to check for any dirt. Why would she want such a hollow second life? As Grey listened to the exchange, she felt something strange. Whenever they spoke of King Arthur, they referred to her directly as Artoria. True, there had always been rumors in the village that King Arthur was actually a woman. But the way these two spoke of her, it wasn't like a historical legend. It was like they were talking about someone they'd fought beside. An old comrade. It was surreal. Grey couldn't help but think so. Still, now that things have come this far, it's up to you to bring it to an end, Shiomi said, rising to his feet and looking at Esk. The only thing we know for certain is that the Black Madonna legend passed down in this village is about the witch Morgan. And since she's the one who started this, it falls to her to end it. Esk let out a quiet sigh. That was always the plan. The masked girl who bears Artoria's spirit has gone deeper inside. Once we move forward, there's no turning back without settling this. Grey, are you ready? To end it. Grey took a deep breath. By now, she had a clear sense of why Mr. Bursk had asked her to follow these guests. They were here to bring closure. To end something that had been passed down in this village for 1,000 years. Which meant, I'll do my best. And see it through to the end. And with that, Grey gave her answer. Chapter 108, On the Surface, in the Village. Although today marked the arrival of traveling merchants, bringing unusual bustle to Blackmore village, only one person sensed the disturbance underground. The village elder, revered by the villagers as grandmother and custodian of the erosion, heard the rumble below. This hunched old woman, who had lived for more than a century, immediately recognized it not as ordinary noise, but as a shift from the temple. Under her lead, a group of fanatical believers, unmoved by the market festivities, rushed into the holy church. Though Sister Illumia had vowed to stop anyone from intruding, the sheer force of numbers overwhelmed the resistance. The executor, the priests, and the messengers had already vanished from the church interior. The elder paid no mind to the church personnel hiding in the shadows to observe. Her focus was on the temple's tremor. Where is Magdalena? Her voice rang clear. The crowd surrounding her parted in response. Grey's mother, Magdalena, was brought forward. Grandmother. Magdalena knelt. Where is Grey? Asked the old woman. Though pinned down by village women, Magdalena remained composed. She went where she was meant to go. You've betrayed your duty, letting the vessel of the king roam freely, the old woman said, slamming her cane into the floor with fury. Confess now, and there may still be mercy. Magdalena kept her head low, eyes on the floor just before her, and spoke softly. The Black Madonna will descend upon this village again and deliver a new revelation. The villagers erupted in murmurs and gasps. The Black Madonna. An ancient legend none had ever witnessed firsthand. They had only passed down ancestral teachings, protecting the true secret buried beneath the temple. You speak of the Black Madonna? The elder's sunken eyes gleamed with fanatic light. If that is true. She turned, lifting both arms high as she gazed up at the statue of the Black Madonna. If the Black Madonna is truly here, then the time has come. From this moment on, the Holy Church is our enemy. Cast them out, as we once fought for our independence. Roar, for this land is our sacred ground, untouchable. Yes. Now we may sing without restraint. We who, since the age of legend, have awaited the return of the king. Her voice then softened, reverent. Swear before the Black Madonna. Please. Guide us once more. The villagers responded with a unified chant. Only the statue of the Black Madonna watched them, expression unchanged. Following the trail left by the girl in the golden mask, the group pressed forward. Beyond the far end of the great cavern lay a twisting path of forked roads and illusionary barriers meant to disorient. But neither Shiomi nor Esk faltered. After turning through those maze-like tunnels, an even more expansive space came into view. Faint silhouettes of structures loomed ahead. Shiomi raised his hand, summoning several lights that soared to the cavern ceiling, casting a radiant glow. Before them stood a stone temple. Ancient and imposing. There's a tomb underground? Lord Elmeloitu was stunned by the scene before him. he muttered as he stepped forward, or is this the real graveyard? Everything before had just been a defense mechanism. The skeletal army, the labyrinthine tunnels. None of it was real. It was all just a deterrent to keep intruders out. Bursk mentioned an underground shrine too, but he'd never seen it himself, Shiomi said. Then he noticed something odd about Esk and lowered his voice. What is it? It's strange. My mana affinity is rising, Esk replied, staring at her hand. Is this a blessing granted through faith? From the moment Esk entered the village, she could sense a deep affinity with a greater source here. The reason was simple, the villagers worshipped the Black Madonna. Morgan. No matter her origin, Esk was undeniably Morgan. Naturally, the villagers' faith would unconsciously channel back to her. As long as they continued to worship the Black Madonna. However, this sudden and intense surge in mana was abnormal. Could it be? Shiomi looked up toward the ceiling of the vast cavern. They couldn't see the outside, but they could feel the flow of the greater source. The villagers are praying to the Black Madonna, Esk concluded as well. Gray turned around in surprise. But today isn't Sunday. The church should be closed. What puzzled her even more was what Esk had said. That the villagers' faith had been passed to her. She was just an outsider. Why would she benefit from their faith? That can only mean. Shiomi suddenly extended his hand. A rope of mana shot out, wrapping around Lord El-Meloitu's waist. The village knows we're here. With a pull, he yanked Lord El-Meloitu backward. Before he could even ask why, a skeleton soldier crashed down from above, its longsword slamming into the ground and carving a deep gash into the stone. What is that? Despite being dragged, Lord El-Meloitu didn't tumble. He flipped midair and landed steadily. It wasn't his own doing, but Shiomi's technique. Behind the skeleton, dozens more emerged from the temple. At the top of the steps stood a girl in a golden mask, clad in solid armor and gripping a spear wreathed in dark mana, its shaft bristling with jagged spikes. The Black Wrong Ominiad. Gray murmured. She knew exactly what that spear was. Suddenly, Esk spoke. Hold my coat. I'm the one best suited for this. She reached out, unfastened her cloak, and tossed it cleanly to Shiomi. A glow of mana wrapped around her body. As the magic spear returned to her hand, Morgan's attire transformed. She reappeared in the world for the first time in 9 years. Her presence both regal and cold. There are 3 who willed wrong Ominiad, yet none of them are the original, Esk said, aiming the spear at the masked girl. Quite the clever trick. Chapter 109, the moment the words left her mouth, Esk vanished. A split second later, a sonic boom rang out, making Gray's ears throb. In the blink of an eye, Esk had already broken through the skeletal formation and charged straight at the masked girl. The skeletons in her way were flung into the air, shattering apart. Her magic spear clashed with the masked girl's pitch-black wrong Ominiad. The 2 weapons locked in a deadlock. Skeleton soldiers not hit in the initial assault rushed in to flank Esk and support the masked girl. But were instantly skewered by mana spikes erupting from the ground. Why have you come? The masked girl growled, her voice tight with tension. To see you, Esk answered calmly. And now, what do you intend to do? Put an end to this. I can't allow that. I am the pointing will of the once existent king. Her remnants, her afterimage, and the sequence preserved for the future. Her voice grew louder, sounding eerily like Artoria's. Even you, Morgan, have no right to end this of your own accord. Her voice carried through the revived ranks of skeletons and reached Gray's ears. Stunned, Gray clutched Tad. Now in scythe form. And stood speechless. Morgan Le Fay. The Witch of Britain. The Dark Queen of Legends. It was real. The Black Madonna will come to us and undo the fate she once set in motion. That was what her mother had said yesterday, after Gray came home to find Esk gone. At the time, Gray thought it was just another one of the village's old prophecies. She'd grown tired and numb from hearing so many of them, and hadn't thought much of it. Do you truly believe that? Esk suddenly asked softly. The masked girl's attacks weakened. Artoria has already returned to Avalon, taking the scabbard with her, Esk repeated. No matter how perfectly you prepare body and mind, her soul will never come back. With those words, Morgan's voice hardened. She swung her magic spear, and the masked girl was blown backward. The blast from the swing cleared everything around her. This time, Shiomi leapt into action. One hand gripping Esk's cloak, the other carrying Lord El-Meloitu. As he soared upward to avoid the shockwave. Gray, though not as strong as the others, still far outmatched El-Meloitu. She followed Shiomi's lead, jumping to evade the attack. 10 years ago, Artoria Pendragon responded to the Holy Grail War's call and appeared in the Far East, Esk said, almost like she was giving a sermon, her spear moving in rhythmic arcs that kept the masked girl completely on the defensive. With her soul's descent came not only the awakening of her body, but her spirit as well. Esk laid out the facts, and the masked girl had no rebuttal. But when a faith passed down for 1,000 years finally bore fruit, not everyone greeted it with joy. Her tone turned cold as she raised her spear high and brought it crashing down. The masked girl barely blocked with her armored hands. At that moment, someone who couldn't accept it interfered with the ritual. Gray and Del Malloy too were both stunned. Someone had interfered with a 1,000-year-old ritual? Just how many secrets did this village hold? So you really think you're the spirit prepared for Artoria's resurrection? Esk's voice dripped with scorn. The entire ritual went off course from the very beginning. Even if Artoria Pendragon appeared here and now, she wouldn't be able to use the body and spirit you've prepared. Her resurrection is impossible. Like a herald of final judgment, Esk coldly delivered the harsh truth. The masked girl's defenses began to falter. Gray couldn't tell if it was because she was reeling from the truth, or if she was simply overwhelmed by Esk's power. It's time you showed your true face. With a final, decisive blow, the black wrong Ominiad was knocked away. A strange spell briefly appeared over the masked girl's body before vanishing. She dropped to her knees, powerless, while the surrounding skeletons crumbled into dust. Shiomi, Gray, and Del Malloy too approached Esk as she reached out and grasped the golden mask. Slowly, she removed it. Instinctively, Gray braced herself to see a face identical to her own. But what she saw made her gasp and cover her mouth in shock. Mother? The face beneath the mask was neither Artoria nor Gray. It was Magdalena. This is your answer, Esk said, gazing at the now lifeless girl. 9 years ago, when Artoria's manifestation triggered your transformation, she found a way to interfere with the ritual. Through the resonance of bloodline and daily habits, she synchronized the spirit here to herself. That was the truth Magdalena had confessed to Esk. To that mother, as long as her wish could be fulfilled, Esk was the Black Madonna. No. It had to be the Black Madonna. She was fortunate to encounter Esk before taking the final step. She laid bare everything she had done and left the decision to Esk. If even the Black Madonna refused to show mercy, then Magdalena was prepared to end it all with her own life. Your mother already possessed traits similar to Artoria, Esk explained to Gray. She was not only your mother, but also one of many outcomes cultivated through the village's legacy. The method of interference was actually simple. Since you were the one most compatible with the village's rituals and the first successful case, it only had to begin with you. Gray suddenly remembered. After her father passed away, her mother became obsessively involved in every aspect of her life. Not just bedtime and prayer. She even dictated the order she ate her meals and how she dressed. Everyone around them gradually accepted it as part of the ritual. And now, Gray finally realized. It had all been a disguise. Her mother had pretended to be the most devoted follower while secretly preparing a way to save her beloved daughter from becoming a vessel. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Gray broke down in tears, kneeling before the spirit that bore her mother's face. Her mother had never stopped loving her. In fact, she loved her even more than before. No one could persist for 9 years. Repeating the same actions, day after day. Without immense love and unwavering resolve. The spirit's face and body began to blur, its form starting to fade. But then, the great cavern and the temple began to tremble. Chapter 110, Is This Really Okay? Inside the windmill cottage, Zepaya Ildnamat muttered to himself as his fingers moved rapidly, manipulating the floating crystal balls in the room like a keyboard. Collecting data, then carefully adjusting countless parameters. By okay, he was wondering whether this would violate the Atlas Institute's contract. After all, until it was certain that King Arthur could never be revived, the Institute was to keep lending out the Logos React. Yet every one of his parallel thoughts concluded there was no issue. Even the usually strict number 6 inches only gave a warning, this could lead to severe damage to the Logos React. Zepaya hadn't done anything. Just kept watching, mentioned something about the village, and silently allowed it all to happen. The Witch of Britannia. The Sage of the Land of Shadows. How marvelous. How exquisite. His words flowed like a song. There could be no more joyous a combination than this. Then he gazed deeply into what hadn't yet occurred. What was just about to begin. I offer my deepest gratitude for your foolish, yet noble, actions. Before Shiomi and the others could react, a strange voice echoed through their minds. Code, Logos React. Abnormal activation, distortion constant, B, extraction time, dot, anti-rationality system initializing. Commencing target conversion, full procedure complete, clear. Commencing Atlas's experiment, the clear voice was interwoven with static and garbled noise. The masked girl with Gray's mother's face suddenly stood up. Morgan, reacting instinctively, swung her magical spear in an attempt to kill her. But the girl's body turned fluid. The weapon passed straight through her harmlessly, and her form reassembled in midair before soaring above the temple. This is cleansing. This is disappearance. This is death. The girl spoke mechanically. Then, her blurred body collapsed in an instant, transforming into a blindingly bright crimson sand. And not just her. The surrounding skeleton soldiers also turned to red sand in an instant. The sand spread rapidly, swelling in quantity to the point where it would soon engulf the entire temple. How is this possible? The Philosopher's Stone from the Atlas Institute has undergone a red transmutation? El Malloy too immediately grasped the situation. Why is one of the 7 great weapons of the Atlas Institute? Logos react. Here? Oh, sorry. I guess I forgot to tell you. Shiomi finally scratched his head. The director asked me to keep it under wraps, so I didn't say anything. El Malloy 2's expression twisted, and he spat out a crude word. Shit. The Philosopher's Stone was one of the Atlas Institute's most revered research achievements. An ideal, ultimate memory medium capable of recording information virtually without limit. It was called the Supreme Tome. And the Logos React was a weapon crafted by shaping the Philosopher's Stone into a specific form. Crimson sand. A boundless red world. Looks like the Logos React understood the meaning of death when S tried to erase Artoria's consciousness, Shiomi said, wrapping Esk's cloak around his shoulders, then giving El Malloy 2 and Gray a pat. If you two stay in contact with this sand for too long, the data pool accumulated over thousands of years will tear you apart. The two began to float slowly into the air, heading toward the temple's rooftop. Flight Magecraft. At least up there, they could avoid it for a while. You could have just taken them and retreated. I'll handle things here, Esk said. It's not that difficult. Shiomi stood beside her and summoned his crimson spear. Even if the chance of failure is nearly 0, I'm not letting you face an unknown enemy alone. The Black Holy Grail really left its mark on you, Esk said with a soft laugh. 9 years ago, in the final moments, Esk had almost been consumed by the Black Holy Grail. Even if Shiomi had managed to resolve everything with Artoria and the others afterward, losing Esk would have haunted him with endless regret. From that moment on, Shiomi had resolved never to fight without her again. As the two spoke, a massive shadow burst forth from the crimson sand. It was Logos React in a new form. Once, it had been a tool used by the village to extract and replicate King Arthur's spirit. Now, it had formed a new body, spread its enormous wings, and loomed overhead. Gazing down at Shiomi and Esk. Esk couldn't help but whisper in awe. No doubt about it. That's the bird of Hermes, Shiomi said. Hermes. The name of the messenger god who protected merchants and travelers in Greek mythology. Over time, that name became fused with Thoth from Egyptian mythology and the alchemist Mercury, eventually becoming a symbol of alchemy itself. It is both a man and a bird named Hermes, appearing in many different forms. And now, it suited this moment perfectly. Having grasped the law of Logos reaction of death, it took the form of the bird of Hermes. A fitting image for a guide to the underworld. You are my death, Fairy Queen Morgan. The red sacred bird, Hermes, projected its voice directly into the minds of everyone present. So I must kill you. In order to escape death, my actions are justified. I define them as right. The sacred bird spread its massive crimson wings. A deluge of red sand feathers poured down, each one brimming with overwhelming mana, potent enough to trigger explosions fiercer than any bomb. After the bombardment, the ground buried under the red sand was left full of craters. Every stone pillar had been obliterated. Only the temple remained untouched. Gray, who had raised her arms to shield herself from the impact, lowered them alongside El Malloy 2, and both looked downward. Shiomi stood in front of Esk, extending a hand to intercept the attack. Water materialized out of thin air, halting the spread of destruction. The 13th primordial rune. The rune of protection. Looks like it can't launch continuous attacks without pause. Even a weapon needs time to cool down, Esk murmured as she slowly crouched. Since my husband is defending, then the attack is up to the wife. Mana gathered at her feet, and a magical spear formed from 13 streams of concentrated mana appeared above them. She fired without hesitation. But if it missed, the resulting explosions could collapse the entire cavern. Directly above them was the swamp beside the village's northern cemetery. They had to prevent seawater from flooding in at all costs. Shiomi placed his hand on her shoulder, casting an acceleration spell on Esk. Then, let's bring this journey to a proper end. With those words, Esk launched herself at the red sacred bird. It unfurled its wings again, ready to release another storm of sand feathers. Chapter 111. The sacred bird had just shown the sheer destructive power of its sand feathers. The bombardment alone could rival anti-fortress noble phantasms. Capable of leveling a castle or wiping out a mid-sized army. The Great Cave had withstood the test of time for centuries, its structure validated countless times. Even with the occasional tremor or shifts in the mountain, the barrier's constant maintenance ensured there was never any real risk of collapse. But this time was different. The sustaining barrier had been breached. What erupted below was an unprecedented explosion. Xiaomi couldn't begin to imagine what would happen to the village above if the cave collapsed. Blackmore Village might be erased from the map entirely. Maybe that was the fate destined for a ritual aimed at reviving King Arthur. But that didn't mean the villagers had to be buried with it. At the very least. Not all of them. He activated the primordial runes, layering a fresh barrier over the damaged one surrounding the underground temple. The shockwaves from the bombardment were gradually restrained and contained, preventing them from affecting the mountain any further. Maintaining the barrier, Xiaomi looked up at Esk in the sky. Hermes' crimson sand feathers were intercepted one after another by small, azure magic spears. Each intercept triggering an explosion. The great cave was lit up like day, resembling a modern missile interception. When the chain of blasts finally ended, scorched dust drifted slowly downward. Hermes let out a piercing shriek, like an enraged falcon. Its trump card had been nullified, and that disruption threw off the calculations of the logo's react. It needed more data. More analysis. To figure out how to break through Esk's defenses and bring her down. The sacred bird spread its wings wide. Each beat stirred a gale. Screeching like a released arrow, it shot straight toward Esk. The barrage of blue projectiles struck its body and exploded. But none of them slowed it down. So you've already gauged the strength of my attacks from our earlier exchange? Esk moved with casual ease, dodging the charge at the last moment like someone sidestepping a passerby. The hard clash between the bird's wings and the magic spear in her hand sparked violently. She couldn't afford even a moment's carelessness. As one of the 7 great weapons of the Atlas Institute, the sacred bird, incarnation of the logo's react, was a living weapon. Its wings were blades. Its talons, crushing pincers. Its feathers, anti-fortress noble phantasms. Then how about this? Esk flicked her hand. From a vortex in the void emerged a pale blue spiral sphere. Unable to halt its charge, the sacred bird collided head-on with the newly summoned weapon. A dense cloud of dust engulfed its form. Esk hovered just beneath the great cave's ceiling, watching the scene unfold from above. If that was all it took, then perhaps the 7 great weapons of the Atlas Institute weren't so impressive after all. The next instant, the sacred bird burst from the cloud, wings spread as if to soar into the heavens. If only this weren't underground. Though it looked unharmed, the intense surge of mana radiating from it betrayed the truth. Esk's strike had dealt it heavy damage. Enough to nearly bring it crashing down. But regeneration was also part of the logo's react. A weapon born of death understood instinctively. Esk was its death. So it ramped up its output, drawing on even more mana to face her. Its feathers, formed of crimson sand, began to grow wildly. In the blink of an eye, the once majestic bird transformed into a monstrous beast, its body bristling with grotesque feathers and vicious talons. Its color darkened like fresh blood, reeking of death. No good. Xiaomi leaned on his red spear, using it as a staff. While continuing to supply mana to Esk, he reinforced the barrier anchoring the structure of the underground temple. A flicker of regret crossed his mind. If only he could deploy a reality marble like the King of Conqueror's second noble phantasm, he wouldn't need to exhaust himself maintaining the battlefield. He could be up there, fighting alongside Esk. He shook his head, brushing off the thought. He already had more than enough power. Wanting even more felt greedy. Then he looked up and nodded toward Esk in the distance. He knew she'd see it. Fight without hesitation. Don't worry about anything else. Well, since my husband says so. Esk's eyes flashed sharply as she fixed her gaze on the now grotesque form of the bird of Hermes. Then I won't hold back anymore. She opened her palm, and from afar, it was as if she cradled the sacred bird in her hand. As a weapon forged of pure logic, the logo's react felt no offense. It simply raised its head and let out a long, piercing cry. Sensing danger, it suddenly beat its wings and began to spiral upward around Esk. Darkness reclaimed the cavern as it rose. From the shadows, countless mana-forged chains burst forth, weaving together behind the bird. The chains flew faster and faster, gradually grazing its tail feathers. The sacred bird twisted and spun midair, dodging the tightening web. The pale blue chains that mist dissolved as they hit the ground. In less than 10 seconds, the sacred bird had ascended to Esk's position. But its beak, talons, even its wings. None could reach her. It had finally closed the distance, but so had Esk's chains. The bird of Hermes flared with blinding light. It was preparing to unleash a point-blank bombardment. Boundary record date. Eliminate? Came a mechanical voice from within. But Esk had already stepped back. Vanishing into the shadows. Brace for a noble phantasm impact, El Melitu. Gray. Xiaomi shouted from beneath the temple. Reflexively, El Melitu pulled Gray down, both of them taking cover atop the shrine roof. Esk stood between them and the threat. The sacred bird twisted its body with everything it had. Radiant light began to envelop it. Like a sun burning for eons. Grey forced her head up and caught sight of Esk. Or rather, Morgan Le Fay. She held a weapon that was both a magic spear and a staff, raising her hand with grace, palm open toward the sacred bird blazing with limitless light. As that light reached its zenith, crimson sand feathers saturated with tremendous mana rained down from the ceiling, aiming to consume the temple and everything within its reach. Fall. Roadless Camelot, the utopia no longer within reach. A massive magic spear erupted into view, enclosing the sacred bird. Its burst of mana surpassed even the birds, slowly consuming the crimson light. And in the end, only one hue remained in the vast underground cavern. That overwhelming light devoured the bird of Hermes, erasing both it and the replicated spirit of King Arthur completely from this world. Chapter 112. Oh, our Black Madonna. Why would you? As the great cave fell silent once more, Xiaomi stopped reinforcing the barrier and steadied himself. A frail, sorrowful voice pierced the stillness. An elderly woman with sunken eyes led a group of villagers to the underground temple, arriving just in time to witness Esk's final battle with the sacred bird. The brilliance and might of Roadless Camelot left no doubt. Her identity was clear to the villagers. The Black Madonna. Morgan Le Fay, the half-sister of King Arthur. Xiaomi seized the moment, bowing his head and dropping to one knee, leaning on his spear like a mysterious knight concealing his identity, paying homage to his queen. Tap, tap, tap. She stepped down from the temple's rooftop. Not falling, but descending on invisible steps, each one sparking with a faint glow. The Black Madonna has arrived. Kneel at once. Xiaomi commanded, his voice low and forceful. They watched Esk descend along the unseen staircase. The rushing villagers fell to their knees in reverence. This is to bring it all to an end. Esk paused midair, gazing down at the kneeling crowd. Among them, only the old woman looked up at her with a mixture of piety and confusion. During her prayers, she had sensed something. King Arthur's spiritual vessel was destabilizing. In haste, she led the churchgoers underground, rushing to the Grand Temple. But they had still arrived too late. The old woman mourned silently. Magdalena had been right. The Black Madonna had come to end it all. The one who had hidden beyond the currents of time had returned, now rejecting the ancient mission she had once entrusted to the village. She was here to reclaim everything she had set in motion. Your long years of devotion are appreciated, Esk said quietly, her tone flat. But this ends here. The old woman's eyes brimmed with desperation and yearning. Please. Please, Black Madonna. Grant us your guidance. Those of us who have faithfully carried out the mission you gave us. Her voice quivered. The ritual has already been corrupted. It's no longer what it was meant to be, Esk declared coldly. Her face was hidden behind the veil she had donned before descending. This was her visage as the Queen of Winter. Now, as the Black Madonna commanding the villagers to relinquish their sacred duty, it was a role she wore perfectly. Corrupted. No, that can't be. It's not possible. The old woman clung to denial, unable to refute the Black Madonna's words, her resistance no more than a fragile murmur. I've always upheld the ritual. Always. And our ancestors, too. We followed it faithfully. It can't be. Black Madonna, please. Have mercy. Could there have been a mistake? But Esk gave no reply. She simply gazed down at them in silence. No reply was the answer. No questions. No doubts. No suspicion permitted. The Black Madonna's word was law. Her will, absolute. Kneeling with his face obscured beneath his hood, Xiaomi allowed himself a quiet smile at Esk's flawless response. In addition, King Arthur's soul has already passed on to Avalon. He will no longer remain in this world. Esk raised her hand, gazing into the darkness above the great cave, her voice distant and ethereal as she delivered the second revelation. You have spent 1,000 years, yet the king no longer intends to answer. He chooses instead to watch over the world from the ideal land until its end. A wave of unrest rippled through the villagers, voices trembling with despair and helplessness. Esk continued her descent, stopping before the gathered crowd. The unseen pressure in the air pushed the villagers even lower to the ground. Even the old woman, full of grief and unanswered questions, lowered her head, too afraid to glimpse the expression hidden behind the Black Madonna's veil. Xiaomi then slowly rose and stepped forward to stand beside Esk, bowing deeply. He tapped the ground lightly with the tip of his red spear, the dull thud drawing the villagers' gaze upward. Only to see a black crow appear from thin air. In Blackmore village, crows were sacred symbols tied to the gravekeeper. Yet not a single person dared question the Black Madonna's authority in that moment. A swarm of crows enveloped her, shrouding her form from view. Moments later, both she and the crows vanished. Just as the villagers assumed the Black Madonna had delivered her divine message and departed, the old woman lifted her head in surprise. Outside, the villagers quickly supported her, hastening their steps as they exited the underground temple, following the Black Madonna's path back into the village. She's gone. Still crouched behind the temple's rooftop, Gray hadn't recovered from the surreal battle. And now, before she could process it all, something even more unbelievable unfolded. There was no doubt. The Black Madonna had come to the village and had spoken directly to her. So she wasn't some wandering guest. The Black Madonna had came to end the girl's mission. Was that why the lady had shown her such concern? Looks like that was the final step, El Meloitu said, rising and sitting atop the shrine roof. Even if the villagers don't understand everything that happened, they'll make their way back into the village and dismantle every spell placed within it. Gray held Ad, now returned to his cube form, and placed him back inside his cage. So, she really was the Black Madonna? Gray still felt like she was dreaming. El Meloitu pulled a cigar from his pocket, trimmed the end with a small knife, lit it, took a puff, and finally replied, hard to believe or not, she's the very same Black Madonna those villagers revere. The witch of Arthurian legend, Morgan Le Fay. I see. Gray nodded slowly. But I have no idea why she did it. Maybe she saw King Arthur after death, and realized the whole thing was meaningless. So she chose to walk away, he speculated. Huh? She saw King Arthur after he died, Gray's instincts told her. It wasn't the spirit of King Arthur from here. Exactly what I said. El Meloitu wasn't in the mood to explain the Holy Grail war to the young gravekeeper. Still, he had to admit. It was a brilliant move. For villagers so deeply rooted in faith, the only way to break them free was to let their faith undo itself. Even if ordered to stop, some villagers would likely persist. Those who had given their entire lives to the resurrection ritual. Huh? Gray looked down to find her body glowing. Then, as if pulled by an invisible force, she vanished into the portal behind her. El Meloitu thought to himself, so that's how they're taking her out of the village. Then immediately shouted, shit. I'm still up here, damn it. How the hell am I supposed to get down from this height? Chapter 113, What a Splendid Show. Zekiah, standing in the shade to avoid the sunlight, spoke to Shiomi and his group. They were now at the foot of a mountain, far from Blackmore village. The sun had already sunk about 80% below the horizon. Even so, the remaining light still caused considerable trouble for the director of the Atlas Institute. He wore the same cloak from the windmill and had pulled up a hood that covered most of his face. Don't make it sound like we were just following a script. Even if things did go more or less the way you expected. Shiomi voiced his displeasure in a half-joking tone. Zekiah smiled. No, I meant the final revelation in the village. Surrounded by a flock of crows, Shiomi and Esk had teleported from the underground temple to the surface village. There, Esk unleashed a grand magecraft, lifting the enchantments carved across the entire village. Those enchantments had been left by the Black Madonna to facilitate King Arthur's resurrection. No one had ever attempted to undo them, and no one in the village was capable of doing so. The Holy Church, which had monitored the place for years, was no different. After all, the Black Madonna wasn't purely a matter of faith, and no one knew if Morgan, the Witch of Britannia, still existed. If they recklessly took action and ended up provoking her, it would be just as troublesome for the church. Of course, after the fabricated divine revelation ended, everything Shiomi told the Holy Church's executor, Sister Illumia, was a complete performance. Naturally, Sister Illumia had no concern about what might happen to the clock tower's magus if the witch were to come knocking. They had done the work, and the church merely benefited. Of course, in her report, the nun would surely describe the church as having exercised restraint and rationality, but that was another matter entirely. As I said before, the one who tied the bell must untie it, Shiomi simply remarked. Esk, too, was a bit surprised that lifting the spell hadn't triggered any backlash. And Morgan hadn't shown up at all. She had braced herself for a confrontation with her other self, but in the end, it wasn't necessary. More importantly, how's Logo's React holding up? Shiomi casually asked Zekiah while glancing at Esk, who was sitting on a roadside stone talking with Gray. It took a direct hit from a noble phantasm. It must have taken serious damage, right? Zekiah closed his eyes, answering calmly, no need to worry. This level of damage will heal on its own with some time. It just won't be able to activate again for a few years. But more than the damage to Logo's React, what truly mattered was that the ritual to resurrect King Arthur had been completely nullified. Unless the real Black Madonna returned, no one could ever reconstruct that complex Age of Gods magecraft ritual. As a result, Arthur's resurrection was now impossible. The Atlas Institute's contract at this site was finished. Zekiah would be able to retrieve the contract as planned and leave with Logo's React. Perhaps he would return to Blackmore Village someday, But whatever purpose he had in would likely have nothing to do with the recent events. In any case, allow me to thank you on behalf of the Atlas Institute, Zipaya said, giving Shiomi a deeply formal bow. Though we cannot say so publicly, the Atlas Institute owes you a debt. Your actions helped us move forward with a task that has spanned 2,000 years. The Atlas Institute couldn't unilaterally terminate the contract, which was why Zipaya had gone to such lengths to collect data on the village and ensure everything was under his control, giving him a way to. Don't worry about it. Just remember what you promised me. Shiomi shook his head. Zipaya nodded deeply. Of course. Whether it's what happened here or Lady Esk's identity, the Atlas Institute won't say a word to outsiders. With that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows at the base of the mountain. Shiomi glanced back. Esk and Gray were still talking. Then looked over at El Meloitu. After everything in the village was settled, Shiomi had remembered that El Meloitu was still on the roof of the temple. He quietly returned to bring him down. His belongings had been packed by members of the church and secretly smuggled out by Bursk, who then reunited with the group at the foot of the mountain. How did it go? Is Mr. Bursk willing to leave the village and help you in the Fifth Holy Grail War? Shiomi asked. El Meloitu lit a cigar, took a drag, and shook his head. Bursk stepped forward to explain. I'm the gravekeeper here. I can't just leave the village. Besides, everything that happened has completely changed this place. I have a duty to stay and keep an eye on what follows. Fair enough. Shiomi looked helplessly at El Meloitu, indicating there was nothing he could do either. Not that El Meloitu expected much. He hadn't came to Blackmore Village with high hopes of persuading the gravekeeper. There's one more thing I'd like to ask of you both, Bursk said. Gray can no longer stay here. Please take her away from the village. Before Shiomi could react, Gray had already run over, visibly anxious. I really have to leave? You don't have a choice, Bursk replied. At the end of the ritual that lifted the village's enchantment, Gray had been taken away by the Black Madonna in front of everyone. Whatever the intent behind it, that kind of power, far beyond anything the villagers could comprehend, made it clear that it was the Black Madonna's decision. And the sudden end of a 1,000-year-old faith, just as it was about to bear fruit, wasn't something the villagers could easily accept. There were surely still those who wanted to carry on with the resurrection ritual. If Gray returned, she'd only be turned into a vessel and a sacrifice all over again. I told you before. You'd have to leave the village one day and see the world, said Bursk. That day is today. You've spent 15 years in a place with barely 100 people. It's time to open your eyes to the world outside. Mr. Bursk. Gray was filled with gratitude and sorrow. She remembered what her teacher had told her and understood his intentions. This wasn't just about finding refuge. It was about stepping out into the world of her own accord. I understand. Gray gripped the latch of the cage tightly. Bursk didn't take ad back. Another sign of how much this decision meant. Chapter 114. After bidding farewell to Bursk, the group left the foothills of Blackmore Village and boarded a bus back to Cardiff. By the time they arrived, it was already midnight. After a day of fighting, Shiomi was utterly drained and had no intention of traveling any further. The group decided to stay in Cardiff for the night and catch a train back to London the next day. But once Gray gets to London, what's the plan? El Meloitu asked over dinner at a restaurant near the hotel. He was referring to her living situation. As someone trained to be the next gravekeeper, Gray clearly had the aptitude to become a magus. Entering the clock tower wouldn't be difficult for her. That said, joining the clock tower involved a mountain of paperwork and procedures. Leaving her at a hotel in London until everything was sorted out didn't sit right. It felt irresponsible. More than that, she had never left the village before and was extremely shy. It was hard to imagine her surviving alone in the clock tower. Especially surrounded by magus who, compared to the villagers who revered her for her appearance, would be even more unnerving in their own way. She can stay at my place for now, Esk offered. Those words instantly brightened Gray's expression. Her eyes lit up beneath the hood, her unease fading. She couldn't deny that she'd been hoping to spend more time with Esk once they reached London. Even knowing Esk was the Black Madonna didn't scare her. Maybe it was because they looked alike. Whatever the reason, she felt at ease. Works for me, Shiomi said. He didn't really have an opinion either way. The house in London was big enough that one more girl staying there was just one more set of tableware. Besides, Sakura and Karan were already living there, and they were all around the same age. They'd probably get along well. Then. Thank you for having me, Gray said, nodding politely. Shiomi smiled and shook his head. Once you've settled in, be sure to send a message to your mother. After all, the final decision about what to do had been made by Esk, after hearing Magdalena's plea. Initially, Esk only planned to tamper with the village's ritual. Just enough to ensure the resurrection would ultimately fail. It was meant as a subtle message to this side's Morgan. My mother. She knows everything, doesn't she? Gray asked quietly. Esk nodded. She does. That's why she remained so calm when I took you away in front of everyone. It was something I'd promised her. But even with the spell lifted, Gray's appearance won't go back to how it was, will it? El Meloitu said, glancing at her. There's nothing we can do about that, Shiomi said, pushing the side dishes on his plate with a fork. The dead can't be brought back, and what's lost can't be reclaimed. Human power only affects the present. If you really can't accept the way you look now. He trailed off, then added with a faint smile, maybe the Holy Grail could grant your wish. The Holy Grail? Gray's voice trembled with surprise. Earlier that afternoon, she had learned a little about the Holy Grail War from Esk. Her altered appearance had been caused by the Fourth Holy Grail War, after all. But until now, it had never crossed her mind that she might become a participant herself. You're encouraging something reckless again, El Meloitu said, looking at Shiomi with exasperation. I'm not encouraging anything. I'm just telling her it's a possibility, Shiomi replied. Even though Mr. Bursk ultimately couldn't leave the village with you to help prepare for the Holy Grail War, Gray, as the next Gravekeeper and bearer of the Holy Lance's shadow, should be able to make up for your shortcomings as a master. Don't say irresponsible things like that. El Meloitu snapped, then quickly caught himself. Sorry. I only mentioned it as a possibility, Shiomi said with a shake of his head. And it's the most dangerous one. Think of it as a warning not to jump into something like that recklessly. He wasn't even sure why he said it. Was he trying to nudge Gray toward the Holy Grail War just to take the spot that Sakura hadn't secured yet? Maybe he was. Shiomi admitted it to himself. Considering how the Fourth Holy Grail War ended in chaos with no clear resolution, it was hard to imagine how a 16-year-old like Sakura would handle such a conflict. Raw power with no combat experience. Never a good combination. I thought so. Something like the Holy Grail. Gray softly declined the idea. She'd never been in a real fight and couldn't imagine what the Holy Grail War would even be like. If everyone there was on Esk's level, she wouldn't stand a chance. Besides, chasing after something you were never guaranteed to obtain. It was dangerous and naive. Mr. Bursk had taught her that too. Don't worry, I was just talking, Shiomi said with a smile. It may have happened by chance, but since Mr. Bursk entrusted you to us, we'll at least do our best to help you settle down in London. Whether as a magus or just a girl starting life in a new place. Esk looked at Gray with gentle eyes. You haven't met them yet, but we actually have 2 girls around your age at home. They're our daughters. Okay. Gray nodded shyly. She felt a bit nervous, but also excited about the thought of meeting new friends in London. She wondered what kind of people they'd be. As for your studies, Shiomi turned to El Meloitu. I'm not sure what kind of magus Gray will become, but let's start by having her attend your classes. El Meloitu's hand twitched. Are you serious? Is that a problem? Putting Gray in a room with those troublemakers? That's a huge problem, El Meloitu muttered. Shiomi looked confused. Isn't Karin in that class too? The moment those words left his mouth, El Meloitu wanted to say the biggest problem was exactly that. Shiomi's own daughter. She'd never technically done anything wrong, but every time one of the students started having unstable thoughts, she'd subtly stir things up and then sit back with a satisfied smile as El Meloitu got dragged into another mess, his stomach in knots. Whatever. If it doesn't work out, I'll recommend her to another class. El Meloitu shrugged. His classroom was half empty anyway, one more student wouldn't make a difference. Most of his students came from unusual backgrounds, each with eccentric personalities and exceptional talent. Alright, we'll go with that for now. I'll call home in London first thing in the morning, Shiomi said, setting down his utensils, having finished his meal. Since we'll have a guest staying over, I'll ask Sakura and Karin to help prepare a room tonight. Save us the rush tomorrow. Chapter 115, For Gray, being watched in the village was nothing new. But back then, the villagers stared because of her altered face. One that was identical to the legendary King Arthur's. Now, it was different. She found herself being examined up close by 2 girls her own age. While it was still because of her appearance, the reasoning felt even more absurd. Does she look like her? Asked Karin, the silver-haired one, peering at her seriously. She does. Way too much, Sakura, with her dark hair, gave a small nod. On the way from Wales to London, at Shiomi's request, Lord El Meloitu had given Gray a crash course on the basics of magus society. There were many eccentric magus whose ways of thinking and behavior were completely detached from normal standards. Compared to them, Shiomi and El Meloitu were practically outliers in the opposite sense. Relatively grounded. So Gray hadn't expected to be stared at like this the moment she arrived, especially not by the 2 daughters Shiomi had mentioned. She had to fight the urge to pull her hood up again. Alright, that's enough. Don't just keep staring at her face. It's rude, Shiomi said from the other end of the couch. The girls listened. At his single remark, they backed away from Gray. As Sakura sat back down, she gently pulled Gray's hood up for her. Huh? Gray blinked at her in confusion. You're not used to people seeing your face, right? Sakura smiled warmly. She had seen straight through Gray's discomfort without a word of explanation. That small, thoughtful gesture earned Gray's initial trust. So, where exactly are you from, Ms. Gray? Karen slid over next to Morgan, watching her sip tea. You look just like Mother. Don't tell me you're some long-lost illegitimate child she abandoned years ago? Morgan remained unfazed, but Shiomi nearly burned himself on his tea. What kind of nonsense is that? How the hell did you reach that conclusion? He asked, dabbing his mouth in frustration. And are you two seriously still pretending to know nothing? Well, it's not impossible, Sakura said with mock seriousness, sitting up straighter. I mean, sure, Dad says he's not even 30, but who really knows his actual age? One quip after another. They sounded like they were dead set on turning Gray into Morgan's and Shiomi's secret love child. Strangely, Gray understood they were joking. Not a single one of them actually believed it. They were parent and children, yet somehow, they didn't feel restrained by the usual formalities. You've got a point, Shiomi sighed, admitting defeat with that one line. Sakura placed a slice of cake in front of Gray, signaling her to dig in. You're staying here from today. That makes you part of the family. It's always just been me and Sakura, Karen said, leaning back on the couch and swinging her legs idly. Sometimes it gets boring. Still can't believe there are people in this day and age who want to revive ancient heroes from the age of gods. You've had it rough. Gray shook her head, her voice soft. I don't really think I've had it rough. It's just, ever since my face changed, the people and things around me changed too. A lot of the time, I just feel a little lonely. Hee. Even little Gray has made some friends. How smug. If there's an opportunity, I'd love to join too. Genderless as I may be, I'll go with whatever suits the mood. Pajama party? Swimsuit shopping trip? I'm in. And if you can bring along some beauties that match my taste, even bet. The sharp voice of Ad shattered the peaceful mood in the living room. Gray quickly grabbed the cage on the table and gave it a good shake. A high-pitched screech rang out from inside, like a bug being squashed. But the usual punishment was cut short. Sakura gracefully reached over, took the cage from Gray's hands, and began inspecting Ad, who now looked thoroughly dazed and cross-eyed. Is this really the anchor that holds the world together? The shadow of the Holy Lance Rongomanyad? Sakura examined it closely. It looks more like a replica, probably made from something else. It only seems usable as a weapon. Karen, licking some cream off her cake, wrinkled her nose at the sweetness. It's probably a copy of that logo's React from the Atlas Institute. From what the director said, that's likely the case, Shiomi shrugged. It's modeled after the personality of Sir Kay, King Arthur's older brother among the Knights of the Round Table. Apparently, he was the only one not interested in fame or mystery. Sakura looked troubled. A legendary Knight of the Round Table. With such a frivolous personality? She still remembered that winter 9 years ago, the one and only time she met the King of Knights at home. The impression left was that of a gallant and dignified older sister. Perfectly matching the knightly presence from the stories. But if her Round Table Knights were all like this? Sakura couldn't help feeling a faint sense of disillusionment. After all, she'd heard those bedtime stories about King Arthur from her father many times. It's just a simulated personality, Morgan explained to Sakura. The real personality of Sir Kay should still be dormant inside that vessel. Unless a special method is used. Or an accident occurs. It generally won't awaken. Gray recalled that moment at the hunter's hut. With just a brief interaction, Morgan had directly spoken with the true dormant personality within Ad. Even if it's not a proper holy relic, it still holds noble phantasm-level power, Morgan commented with a smile. If it were to fully unleash its true form, even I would have to take it seriously. Of course, that still depended on how much of Ad's power was actually released. Holy relic. Shiomi muttered under his breath. Sakura hadn't told him her idea yet, and it seemed only Morgan was in the know. He decided not to press it for now. I see. Then you should really take good care of it, Sakura said, returning Ad to Gray, showing no interest in claiming the weapon's power for herself. That gesture earned a subtle look of approval from Morgan. Sakura, when you're free, come by the study, Shiomi said as he set down his teacup. There's something I want to talk to you about. Sakura blinked in surprise, not quite catching on at first, but nodded. I'll come in a bit. I want to show Gray her room first. No need to rush. Take care of things here first, Morgan said, giving her a reassuring glance. Shiomi smiled. I never said it had to be right now. I'll be waiting in the study. Settle Gray in first. It's all set up just like we planned, Sakura said proudly, balling her fists in excitement. Karin and I spent the whole morning getting it ready. Gray lowered her head even more, her embarrassment growing. You've all done so much for me. Chapter 116, an hour later, in the study. Have you found a suitable holy relic yet? As soon as Sakura sat down, Shiomi asked from behind the desk. Clearly, her father already knew she was planning to participate in the Holy Grail War and wanted to have a proper talk with her. No, not yet, Sakura shook her head uneasily. Considering what you said about the Fourth Holy Grail War. Excluding Mother. Several of the remaining servants were way beyond standard. Preparing an appropriate holy relic isn't easy. King of Knights, Artoria. King of Conquerors, Iskander. King of Heroes, Gilgamesh. Even putting those three aside, from a more rational perspective, the other three servants weren't lacking either. That included Hassan of the 100 Faces. For a faction focused on intelligence gathering, a servant capable of acting like dozens of agents, combined with presence concealment, was already an exceptional asset. Diarmid was also a top-tier servant. If summoned in the Saber class with both Moraltach and Beagletach, he would likely be even stronger. As for Gilles de Race, his noble phantasm could operate independently as a magical energy reactor. In a one-on-one fight rather than a free-for-all, he could pose a serious threat. So although Sakura was set on joining the Fifth Holy Grail War, she still hadn't settled on a relic. After all, her father hadn't prepared a holy relic back then either. He'd intended to summon the most compatible berserker, but ended up finding himself a wife and giving both her and Karin a mother. It sounded absurd, and thinking about it only made it more absurd. I see. Then you'd better get a move on, Shiomi said, looking at Sakura. I won't oppose you. As long as this is your own will, you have every right to pursue the Holy Grail as a magus. You're okay with it? Sakura was so surprised, she couldn't close her mouth. Though she knew her father was open-minded, the Holy Grail War hadn't left him with pleasant memories. That instantly put her at ease. Sakura gave a small, sheepish smile, realizing she could now talk things over calmly with her father. She'd been holding back all this time out of fear that Shiomi would be against it. But there's some bad news concerning the participants in this Holy Grail War, Shiomi continued. Unlike last time, the clock tower has 2 seats this time. One of them has already been decided. Your intel's right on time, Dad. Sakura straightened up and listened closely. Shiomi chuckled and shook his head. The confirmed seat belongs to the Lord of the Department of Astromancy, Marisberry Animosphere. The Department of Astromancy? Sakura was mildly surprised. The last lord from the clock tower to join the Holy Grail War was the former Elmeloi, who belonged to 2 departments. But he ended up facing her father and got caught in the conflict between the democratic and aristocratic factions. He was doomed from the start. The Lord of Astromancy also belonged to the aristocratic faction, but based on Shiomi's intel, that side wasn't particularly interested in political power plays. Marisberry rarely showed up at major clock tower events, leaving those responsibilities to his daughter, Olga Marie Animosphere. So Sakura knew almost nothing about the opponent she'd soon be facing. In my view, if there's only one spot left, Sakura needs to find a way to claim it first. Shiomi rested his chin on one hand, calmly analyzing the situation for her. But right now, all the factions aware of the Holy Grail War are maneuvering to secure that final slot. Besides Lord Delmeloy too, the Sophiari family, a branch of the Department of Spiritual Levication, is also contending for it. On top of that, some higher-ups have proposed dispatching a sealing designation executor. The implication was clear. Sakura might have to return to Fuyuki City early and in secret, waiting for the Holy Grail summons to receive a command spell. After all, even if the original seats granted to the 3 great families and the Mages Association were accounted for, 2 slots still remained. Those positions were typically left for unaffiliated magus. Those without backing or support, unable to prepare a proper holy relic, and most often destined to become cannon fodder in the war. That had always been part of the 3 families' hidden agenda when establishing the Holy Grail ritual. Still, the benefit was that their identities remained concealed until the war began. Don't worry about the number of spots. I already have a good idea, Sakura said confidently, hands clasped together. Shiomi was curious but held back from asking more, not wanting to accidentally expose any secrets. That just leaves the holy relic. I'll leverage my connections at the clock tower and do everything I can to find something suitable for you. Can't my mother help me with that? Sakura suddenly asked. If that's what you want, she could serve as a hidden trump card. Appearing mid-battle to help you eliminate your opponents, Shiomi said with a chuckle, not finding the idea unreasonable. No, I was just kidding. Sakura waved her hands quickly. If she helped, then there'd be no point in me entering the Holy Grail War. I don't want her to burden herself with this. Your wish. Shiomi began, but caught himself. Forget it. I won't ask. That kind of thing is personal. You're 16 already. If you were in a regular school, you'd be in high school. I should give you some privacy. Sakura paused for a moment, then shook her head. No, I can tell you. It's a small wish, but one only the Holy Grail can grant. Seeing this, Shiomi gave her a subtle nod to go on. I want the Holy Grail to give my mother a real life. Not just keep her in this world as a familiar, Sakura said, gazing into Shiomi's eyes. Her voice was soft, but filled with heartfelt sincerity. Shiomi Tenkai was stunned by the simplicity of her wish. For a long moment, he was speechless. Also, your talent in magecraft is exceptional. As a magus, you've already reached the highest level. Choosing not to comment on her wish, Shiomi shifted the topic. But you understand what joining the Holy Grail War really means. The next head of the Tasaka family is bound to participate. Which meant Sakura would eventually have to face her biological sister, Rin. Even if they allied at first, once only the two of them were left, they'd have no choice but to fight. I'm ready for that. Sakura placed a hand over her chest, her tone quiet and resolute. Unless absolutely necessary, I won't risk my life. I believe Tasaka-senpai would feel the same. That's the best outcome. Even so, Shiomi felt a storm of emotions stir within him as he heard those words. But all he could do was say that much. Chapter 117, Once something becomes a habit, stopping can feel strangely uncomfortable. Even if that habit is grueling training that feels like hell. So when Tenkai Shiomi realized his master was nowhere near their usual training grounds, he thought he could sneak in some rest. But with nothing to do, he quickly found himself unexpectedly bored. This was the realm of the dead. There was nothing to kill time with. No records, no books, no objects. Without training, there wasn't even anyone to talk to. After zoning out on the castle wall for a long time, staring into the endless wastelands and mountains, Shiomi finally got up, bored out of his mind, and went to look for his master. That said, the castle was big, but not exactly full of mysteries. All it took was a brief sensing of the surrounding mana to figure out where his master was. It led him to a garden. Or rather, a grove might be the better word. Ever since Shiomi had planted the first tree, a corner of the castle had slowly turned into this grove. Aside from that one tree, the others were all fruitless. The reason wasn't complicated. Skathak had warned him not to grow too many fruit-bearing trees. Shiomi didn't understand the reasoning, but since his master said so, he complied. Master? You're here, right? If you can hear me, say something. Shiomi walked through the grass-covered grove, calling out at a normal volume. He noticed the grass had grown past his ankles. Instinctively, he wondered if it was time to trim it, or maybe use magecraft to suppress its growth. What had started out as a small experiment had, over time, become a proper grove. In this cold, gray land of death, it added a small splash of life. Don't be so loud. As he reached the first tree he had cultivated, a lazy, teasing voice came from above. I'm not so old that I can't hear you. Shiomi had already spotted her after his last call. A pair of dark purple metal boots lay under the tree. Skathax. Looking up, he saw her sitting on a thick branch midway up the tree, holding an apple she'd already eaten halfway through, lazily gazing toward the far side of the castle. It's not like you, master, to skip supervising my training, Shiomi said, leaning against the tree, half joking. Taking a break once in a while isn't a bad thing. If all you remember about this place someday is endless suffering, even I wouldn't feel good about it. Skathak smiled as she spoke. Shiomi shook his head. Too late for that. Is that so? Then nothing can be done. She added, just rest for now. With your current skill level, you don't need to train day and night anymore. So, does that mean I'm almost ready to graduate? Shiomi asked. You wish. When you actually manage to defeat me, we'll talk about that, Skathak replied with a condition that was practically impossible. Shiomi felt a chill down his spine. But since time here stretched endlessly, he didn't really care how long it took. And here I thought you weren't interested in food, Shiomi said, glancing at her taking bite after bite of the apple. Not like you need it anyway. Maybe because the tree had been nourished by magic, it never had a full flowering season. It was always full of fruit. How could I pass on something my disciple worked so hard to grow? Skathak said nonchalantly. Besides, this tree is still drawing mana from you. In a way, these fruits are like your flesh and blood. Seems worth a taste. Shiomi's expression darkened. That sounds so wrong. Not going to eat any. I was planning to, but after what you just said, I'm kind of not in the mood anymore. Shiomi rubbed the back of his neck, feeling oddly conflicted. The grove could only exist because he acted as a conduit, channeling the mana of the land of shadows through his magic circuits and turning it into nourishment for the plants. He had always thought of it as a form of irrigation. But after what his master said, the whole thing just felt weird now. What master would treat his disciples' flesh as food? Are you some devil from hell? Shiomi muttered, unable to hold back a complaint. Skithak smiled and responded cheerfully, don't take it so seriously. Just think of it as your master's not-so-funny joke. So, what exactly are you doing here? Shiomi asked. Just resting, Skithak replied. I mean, why are you sitting in a tree? Isn't the grass more comfortable? He asked again. If you're so curious, why not climb up and see for yourself? Skithak patted the branch beside her. The view from up here isn't bad. Without hesitation, Shiomi accepted her invitation. He jumped up and landed next to her on the branch. In truth, the view from the treetop wasn't much better than from the castle walls. With other trees partially blocking the sideline, most of what he could see was the magecraft-grown grove below. Isn't his pretty much the same? Shiomi said, unable to understand the appeal. It was somewhat pleasant to look at, sure, but was it really worth skipping training for? You stupid disciple. Skithak leaned back against the trunk, holding an almost finished apple core in one hand. You've cultivated life in a barren place like this. As your master, I can't help but feel proud. It's no surprise you don't get it. Shiomi gave her a sidelong glance. So when did I go from just a disciple to a beloved disciple? Is this a sign that my training's about to get even worse? Just saying it isn't enough for you to understand? Skithak smiled and waved the apple stem in front of his face. Before Shiomi could make sense of her action, she casually flicked the apple core away. It landed clearly on a patch of grass not far off. I'm not your pet, Shiomi said, twitching at the corner of his mouth. Skithak let out a tired-sounding sigh. Just watch. Huh? Shiomi turned to look at the apple core. He noticed that the mana around it suddenly surged. It looked like it was dissolving, and before long, the core vanished into the grass. This was the first time Shiomi had seen that happen. He'd grown the fruit and often tossed the cores into the grass as fertilizer, but he'd never actually watched what happened afterward. What on earth is this? He murmured, covering his face and staring at the spot where the apple core had disappeared. Chapter 118. Don't be so nervous, you idiot disciple. Skithak's usual calm tone carried a trace of indulgence. There's nothing wrong with this garden. It's just that when you created these things, you unconsciously gave them qualities they originally didn't possess. Her words put Shiomi somewhat at ease, and he listened quietly as Skithak continued. Magecraft that creates life borders on taboo, but it isn't impossible, she said. What you've done is even more unusual. Bringing life into a place that had none to begin with. Life like that is, by its nature, exceptional. She pointed toward the far end of the lawn. At the end of the day, even though they look like plants, all of these are born from your mana. No matter how real they appear, they're ultimately just mana made manifest in physical form. Mana made manifest. Shiomi nodded, still not fully grasping it. Skithak gave an example. There's a magus like that, isn't there? A half-human, half-incubus with clairvoyance that sees through everything. He's called the magus of flowers. Merlin, right? Shiomi replied. His master clearly knew things beyond the land of shadows. Sharing such knowledge was also part of her teachings. It was wisdom drawn from the abyss. Attained by transcending humanity, slaying gods, and existing outside the world itself. That man merely passes by, and flowers bloom. If he intervenes, he can make even this place blossom with beautiful things, Skithak said calmly. Shiomi turned away slightly. So what are you trying to tell me? As if answering the unease stirring in his heart, white blossoms began to bloom along the tree's branches. Mirroring his hidden thoughts. Don't be so petty. I'm comparing you to the magus of flowers, Skithak said, gently brushing one of the nearest blossoms. In that sense, even if you don't have clairvoyance, you already rival that magus. I guess I really let you down, master, not having clairvoyance, Shiomi muttered. What a childish response. Skithak found it amusing and didn't press the matter further. This boy was even more resilient than he looked. Judging from everything he'd done here, even Kuchi Lane would fall short. Who would have thought that in an age where mystery was fading, someone like her, cut off from the world, would end up with a disciple so endearing? The more fond she grew of him, the more she wanted to teach him everything. And the less she could bring herself to go easy on him. Shiomi almost said, I'm just a kid, so what? But his sharp sense of danger warned him that saying that might strike a nerve. It wouldn't be fatal. But it definitely wouldn't end well. There's one more thing, Skithak said. Merlin only ever made flowers that looked good. But your magic turns into nourishment. For me, it's just mana, But for humans, that's something that can sustain life. As she said this, she gave Shiomi a pat on the shoulder in recognition. Okay, if you keep praising me, I won't be able to take it anymore. Shiomi looked a little embarrassed. The flowers on the tree were still in full bloom. It would take some time before they bore new fruit. He jumped down from the branch and landed on the grass. Since we're not training today, I'm going to get some rest. Are you coming down, master? He asked, half in jest. Skathak leaned against the tree trunk. Yes. I've seen enough of the view. Time to come down. She descended lightly from the branch. Though it wasn't necessary, Shiomi instinctively reached out to catch her. As he held her silk-covered left hand and watched her land gracefully, his gaze dropped, and he noticed her feet. Bare, but not exposed. Let me help you put on your shoes, he said, as if the words slipped out on their own. It's fine. To this strange, even questionable offer, Skathak responded without a hint of hesitation. Matching Shiomi's slow crouch as he reached for her boots, she sat down on the grass and naturally extended her legs toward him. Shiomi's hand paused briefly, then he took hold of her foot, also wrapped in that smooth, silk-like material. I thought you'd think I was being weird. That wouldn't be wrong. But even though I'm a queen, as you can see, I have nothing in this domain. Let alone servants, Skathak said casually. Even if it doesn't really matter, there's still a natural curiosity. But asking a disciple to do this is not the easiest thing to say out loud. While fitting on one of the boots, Shiomi asked, no one's ever done it before? Sitendo wasn't the type for this sort of thing. Neither is his son. They were both excellent students. But that's all. Skathak met Shiomi's gaze. Maybe it's because you come from a different era and country than the others that you're prone to such odd behavior. It just crossed my mind. After all, I've been training here, but I've never found a way to repay you. Shiomi shrugged. I'm just glad you don't mind. Skathak nodded in thought. I see. No need to be bothered by it. The moment you survived in this place, it was already certain I'd accept you as a disciple. This is the realm of the dead. The mana concentration in the air is so high that if a normal person ended up here, a single breath would cause them to rupture from the inside. In a sense, it's no different from a vacuum. As she spoke, Shiomi finished helping her into her short boots. He was about to say something else when he suddenly sensed an unusual flicker of life. What's that? Shiomi asked. Oh? You're already able to detect such things? Skathak took his hand and stood up from the ground. You guessed right. Another unfortunate soul has, for some reason, fallen into this realm. Humanity's numbers were vast. 1 or 2 disappearances rarely caused a stir. Just another local tragedy. There's no saving them. Shiomi frowned, feeling a pang of pity. Skathak confirmed, the moment they fell into this place, they were already dead. I want to see for myself. Is that all right? Shiomi asked suddenly. It is. Skathak didn't release his hand. Think of it as a test. Use your magecraft to teleport us there. Let's see if you can reach the location of the deceased within 3 tries. Shiomi nodded firmly. All right then, master. Please watch me closely. Chapter 119. To be honest, Karin had always known her personality was awful. She'd realized it early on. How she couldn't help but smirk when others were suffering, especially if they were upright, respectable people. Watching someone who is supposed to walk a shining path spiral into depression over something trivial and eventually fall off course gave her a strange sense of satisfaction. It felt like finding an oasis after wandering 3 days and nights through the desert. If that mindset had come from trauma or a bad home environment, she might have had an excuse. But the truth was, she'd been like this since birth. As for who she inherited it from, whether it was her mother or father, Karin didn't really know. Her father, or rather, her current father, had always kept quiet about it, and Karin had tactfully chosen not to dig deeper. Whether it was Karin Hortensia or Karin Kotamin, those were names of the past. Now, she was Shiomi Karin. Or Karin Shiomi, if written Western style. Our innate nature can't be changed. That's a given. But who we become, we can shape through the choices we make in life. That was what he always told her. But once she stepped into the world of Magus and began to understand things through magecraft, Karin came to realize, it wasn't that she had a bad personality. It was that her origin was bad. Maybe her origin was something like schadenfreude. That would explain a lot. In ordinary society, a personality like that would be a problem. But among Magus, it was nothing unusual. In fact, bad personalities were basically a default trait among Magus. Be too normal, too kind, and you wouldn't survive long in that world. Take the blonde girl sitting across from her, for example. She had the same kind of badness. Rain's Elmeloy Archie sort. Lecturer in the Elmeloy classroom, and younger sister of Lord Elmeloy too. Of course, Rains and Lord Delmeloy too weren't related by blood, much like how Karin wasn't blood-related to Tenkai Shiomi. That parallel made Karin feel an odd sort of kinship. "Oh, what a pity you didn't go to Adra Castle, Karin." My brother's reaction would have been priceless. Rains sipped her tea, clearly delighted as she recounted the incident at the Separation Castle. Karin stirred her cup slowly, sugar cubes still clinking faintly at the bottom. "I already heard about that from Gray. It's a shame. Father told Gray to go out and get some experience, so he arranged for her to accompany my sister. Didn't expect they'd run into the professor there." Rains turned toward Gray, who was sitting with them. "So why did your sister take Gray to the Adra Castle?" That direct stare made Gray squirm slightly. She lowered her head and answered quietly. "Money." "Huh?" Rains blinked. "You're not exactly strapped for cash, are you? Father says money is a good thing. No one ever complains about having too much. Since the city's owner claimed the inheritance would go to anyone who solved the puzzle." Karin raised her eyes. "In that sense, my views align with his. To be precise, it was to buy high-quality holy relics for Sakura to use in the Holy Grail War. But Shiomi insisted they should rely on their own efforts, so Sakura had gone to investigate the Adra Castle herself. In the end, they didn't gain anything. Just witnessed a revenge story that left them at a loss for words." "It really was for the Holy Grail War, wasn't it?" Rain saw through the Shiomi family's intentions immediately and called it out without hesitation. "That's right," Karin replied without denial. "There was no need to keep that kind of thing a secret. If they secured a position through the clock tower, it would be official. If they joined by other means, they'd start with less support. But their identities would be exposed eventually anyway. It was now October. If they followed the timeline of the Fourth Holy Grail War, the next one should be held in the final 2 months of the year. However, the previous war had ended irregularly, and the ley lines hadn't accumulated mana according to the normal cycle. According to a joint report sent to the Mages Association by the Fuiuki Magi and the land's caretakers, the Tasaka family, the Fifth Holy Grail War wouldn't begin until early next year at the earliest. A conservative estimate placed it between late January and early February. "Your father's been coming by less often to give me lessons lately. Could it be that?" Rains narrowed her eyes at Karin, her tone sly. Just as Miss Rains predicted. Karin's tone was calm and composed. Since the decision had already been made, Shiomi had no intention of stopping them. To maximize Sakura's real-world experience, her magecraft training at home had gradually shifted toward practical combat. It was tough, but Sakura never gave up. And Shiomi never once tried to dissuade her. "Oh. How ambitious." Rains grew more intrigued. "But aren't you jealous, Karin? I mean, your parents are focused entirely on your sister these days. Doesn't it bother you that you're getting less attention?" Karin took a sip of her tea. "Not in the slightest. If anything, it's exactly what I wanted." In truth, the situation was a win-win. Sakura was being forged through intense training, while Karin got to sit back and watch her suffer. Everyone came away with something. Besides, Rains had gotten one thing wrong. Shiomi's focus was strictly on magecraft. In their day-to-day life, things hadn't changed at all. If anything, ever since Gray moved in, Karin had found herself being more considerate toward the girl. "So, Miss Rains invited Gray and me for tea today just to chat about the Adra Castle. And casually probe into how our family is preparing for the Holy Grail War?" Karin's golden eyes flashed with sharp insight. Rains raised an eyebrow and cheerfully shifted the topic. "Actually, I received an invitation from the Trambulia faction. Normally, I'd turn it down, but they extended it through Norwich, who handles our funding. I can't ignore that. Trambulia, currently led by MacDonald Trambulia Elrod, was one of the 3 great noble families of the Clock Tower. He was also the leading figure of the Democratic faction and the head of the First Department of General Fundamentals. I'm sure your father received the same invitation," Rains added. There was no way Tenkai Shiomi, now rising in prominence and regarded as a key talent by the Democratic faction, would be left out of such high-profile social affairs. Even if he had no desire to attend, an invitation would definitely reach him. "No need to worry about that," Karin said, producing the invitation. "I'll be accompanying father. You won't be left bored, Miss Rains." "Well, that's wonderful news." Chapter 120, In truth, Rains sought out Karin to talk not only because they got along due to their similar personalities, but also for a much simpler reason. She felt uneasy about attending the social gathering alone. Depending solely on the autonomous humanoid formal wear, Tremor, wasn't nearly enough. With so many magus in attendance, any unexpected incident would leave her helpless. She needed someone trustworthy to serve as her escort. Naturally, her first choice was her current tutor, Tenkai Shiomi. Having him around might be an exaggeration to say that not even half the clock tower could stop her. But it wouldn't be far off. However, Shiomi had never been particularly fond of such events. Sometimes he'd show up, sometimes he wouldn't. No one could be sure. If he chose not to go, Rains figured she'd have to ask him for an alternative form of protection. For instance, there was Gray, the young gravekeeper who moved into Shiomi's house 3 months ago. She had once demonstrated the shadow of the Holy Lance's power at the Separation Castle. In terms of strength, she was more than capable of serving as a bodyguard. Though she had formally joined the clock tower and became part of El Meloy 2's class, she showed no intention of moving out. She practically looked like she'd already been taken in by Shiomi. Thanks to the precedent set by Sakura and Karin, rumors had begun to circulate that Gray had been adopted as his third daughter. Of course, it was Flat, a student of El Meloy 2, who spread the rumor. So no one really took it seriously. Only Flat continued trying to confirm it. In return, let me share a little intel I picked up from Trambalia, Rains offered, returning the favor. It's about the Fifth Holy Grail War. Oh? Karin perked up, listening closely. Regardless of the content, intel was still intel. You had to hear it first to judge its value. The association still hasn't finalized a plan. Due to interference from the Department of Astromancy, several factions are now vying for the remaining slot, said Rains. Karin nodded. I know. One side is the association itself. They're planning to send one of the most powerful current sealing designation executors, Bazit Frogem Kremitz. The other is Sola Ui Nuadari Sophia Ri, who joined the last Holy Grail War with your brother, Kenneth. Shiomi had already looked into Sola Ui's intentions for participating again, for various reasons. Apparently, she was hoping to use the Holy Grail in Fuiuki to revive Kenneth, who had died in battle. After all, his body was still magically preserved in the Sophia Ri household. Neither cremated nor buried. Shiomi had once thought the two had little affection for each other. But perhaps Kenneth's self-sacrifice had finally made the young lady realize something she'd long ignored. After all, at the time, Shiomi had considered sending both of them off together. So neither would be left behind to suffer. It's not just those two, Rains added. Apparently, there are also newcomers offering money to buy the selected Magus's spot. That doesn't sound very realistic, right, Gray? Karin turned to the girl who had been quietly eating. Gray quickly looked up. I suppose so. She wasn't familiar with the details and had simply been listening with a learner's mindset. As Karin pointed out, Sola Ui would never accept such a deal. After all, only the Holy Grail could grant the wish of resurrecting the dead. Because the last Holy Grail War had nearly cost her life, Sola Ui's brother had been firmly against her participating again. As for the sealing designation executors, they were even harder to pin down. According to Shiomi, they were like mission machines. Each one a powerhouse in battle, but completely lacking in basic common sense outside of it. Even a slight disruption in their logistics could seriously hinder their operations. Oh dear, just thinking about the Holy Grail War makes me feel like my brother doesn't stand a chance, Rain said, entirely unbothered. Hopefully, all the contenders will fight over the remaining slots, and he'll give up on participating altogether. Father feels the same, Karin replied bluntly. He said the professor is better suited to teaching from the sidelines than charging into battle. If he hadn't summoned Iskander, the king of conquerors, last time, he probably would have died in the war. After all, until Shiomi discovered the Greater Grail had issues, his plan had been to eliminate the other masters and servants one by one. At most sparing Tokiomi, with whom he'd made a gentleman's agreement. Then I'll have to trouble your father to help persuade my brother. Now that the El Meloy faction has splintered, I'm the only one left trying to uphold the name, and it's hanging by a thread, Rain said, resting her chin on one hand. It'd be quite a hassle for me if talented people like him were lost to the Holy Grail War. Rain spoke in a half-serious, half-joking tone, and Karin didn't take it seriously. Though she, like Rains, enjoyed watching others suffer, Karin had her limits. One of which was never persuading others from the sidelines to step onto a battlefield where death was all but certain. A line she wouldn't cross. Or maybe, Karin thought, it wasn't really her own boundary, but one she inherited from her father. Just following it as if it were second nature. If she didn't, she wouldn't be able to live a normal life. Shiomi struggled with this too. But Karin couldn't bear to see him suffer. Perhaps it was what they called favoritism. After more than 10 years, she had indeed gained a lot. After giving a half-hearted agreement to Rain's final not quite a request, Karin and Gray wrapped up their tea party and left the Archie-Sort household on Sora Street. Do I really have to go too, Karin? Walking home, Gray looked at Karin beside her. Didn't Blackmore's gravekeeper tell you to go out and see the world? Karin replied with a calm smile. Now that you've entered the clock tower and are a registered Magus, it's important to understand the Magus society a bit more. Well, that may be true. Gray looked uncertain. She knew full well that even if Karan said nothing, Shiomi would end up taking both of them to the gathering anyway. Sakura was too busy to care about these superficial events, and Morgan had zero interest in mingling with ordinary magus. So this outcome was only natural. What Gray didn't notice, though, was that as she fretted, the corners of Karan's mouth subtly curled upward. A shy and introverted gravekeeper, forced to attend an extravagant social gathering. Karan never got tired of that reaction. It only made her more eager to see what amusing things might unfold at the event. Chapter 121, Wow, you're really dressed up. The next morning, at the train platform departing from London, Rains, dragging her suitcase behind her, blurted this out the moment she saw Karan. Is it not appropriate? Karan turned in place, inspecting her outfit. She wore a deep crimson dress, its neckline adorned with a sapphire-studded ribbon. A round beret rested atop her long silver hair. Amid a group clad mostly in muted grays and cool tones, she definitely stood out. No, it's perfect? Almost too perfect? You startled me, Rain said cheerfully. You usually dress elegantly, sure, but your colors and patterns are usually so plain you could pass for someone from the Holy Church. Karan gave a knowing smile. I do share some of the Church's teachings. Unfortunately, Father never supported my baptism, so I tend to lean that way subconsciously. In truth, Karan's understanding of the Holy Church now surpassed even Shiomi's. If she ever needed to pass as a nun or run a church, no one would question her qualifications or abilities. Still, she chose the world of magus over a life of faith, and she didn't feel that was any sort of loss. My father picked the outfit. As long as others think it suits me, that's what matters most, Karan added plainly. Shiomi, standing nearby, spread his hands. You looked like you were thinking, has my dad lost his mind? When you first saw the outfit. What's with the sudden change of heart? I should have acted more displeased, just to make him second-guess himself a bit longer, Karan replied, unabashedly pleased. There was nothing more entertaining than teasing someone like Shiomi. Since it didn't always work, the timing had to be just right. TCH. Shiomi clicked his tongue. Keep that up and I'm not carrying your luggage anymore. Handle your own suitcase. Karan actually reached for it. But Shiomi dodged. Rains couldn't stop laughing. You're hopeless against girls, teacher. That kind of softness will cost you. I've never really paid for it. No point butting heads with your own people, Shiomi replied casually. The group laughed and boarded the train, settling into a set of 4 seats facing each other. May I ask what this trip is about? Gray, who had stayed quietly observant until now, finally gathered the courage to ask. The event they were attending was said to be the debut of this generation's Princess of Gold and Princess of Silver. That was all Gray knew. And she was deeply curious. Well, I could explain, Rains began as she unwrapped a liquor chocolate and offered it to Karan and Gray, but since this is about the Department of Creation, it's better if teacher explains. Savoring the rich wine aroma and sweetness spreading through her mouth, Karan nodded in agreement. After all, my father's a talent personally recognized by the Lord of the Department of Creation, so of course we've had close ties. Shiomi had planned to stay out of the discussion, but seeing the topic land squarely on him, he leaned back in his seat and gave it some thought. Simply put, it's like the factions within El Meloy's camp. Archibald and Archie sort. It's the same with Lady Anarai's Valuala faction. She herself comes from the Atraham family, which leads the Valuala faction, but this time the social invitation came from the Islama branch. Crossing his arms, Shiomi continued calmly. As you know, magus of the Department of Creation are usually artists of some kind. Lady Anarai, for instance, specializes in sand painting. While the forms of artistic pursuit vary widely, the Islama family has always been obsessed with crafting the most beautiful humans. And their results are the generations of princesses of gold and silver, Karan added. But I doubt my father accepted the invitation just out of respect for Valuala. Faced with Karan's remark, Shiomi shrugged. I heard Tuko will be there too. It's been years. I should ask if she's ready to pay back what she owes me. Oh, right. I forgot she was your teacher back when she held the grand title, Rain said slyly. This wasn't a secret within the clock tower. Shiomi, known more for combat than theory, had never published anything. Just being Tuko's student wasn't enough to get him a ceiling designation. Instead, he became the one enforcing them. Still, because it was such a well-known fact, Rains found it all the more baffling. Is Tenkai Shiomi really a student of Tuko Ozaki? El Meloy's young protege often found herself doubting it, guided by instinct. Grand. Is that the highest rank for a magus? Gray asked. Grand. Brand. Pride. Fs. Cause. Count. Frame. These were the 7 primary ranks within the clock tower. In theory, yes. But in practice, the highest functioning rank is Brand. Even most lords stop there. Like the Lord of Valuala we just mentioned, Karan glanced at Shiomi. As for my father, he's one rank below, at pride. Rains let out a sigh. Wow, for a magus with no backing to rise to pride. That's impressive. He's one of the top ceiling designation enforcers today. Honestly, calling him the strongest wouldn't be far off. I always thought I'd top out at FS, Shiomi said, pursing his lips as if it weren't a big deal. The Democratic faction probably just needed someone to be their banner, so they pushed a no-name like me up the ladder. Only Karan truly understood. His actual strength had long since surpassed what the Clock Tower's ranking system could measure. But I heard the higher-ups have been trying to promote you to brand in recent years? Gray asked. Rains looked even more delighted. That's right. But because it's so unprecedented, it's met resistance from all sides. They haven't been able to make it official. That's just the higher-ups playing their usual games. Nothing to do with me, Shiomi said indifferently, even cracking a joke. Besides, hardly anyone reaches grand. And when you do, it probably just means you're next in line for a sealing designation. Did father ever take part in a sealing designation mission against Tako Ozaki? Nope. By the time I was active, she'd already taken out several squads of sealing designation agents. Shiomi spread his hands in a mock gesture of regret. Chapter 122. Their destination was the Lake District in Western England. One of the few well-known resort areas in the UK. It was also the birthplace of the beloved children's story, Peter Rabbit. When Karan was a child, Peter Rabbit had been one of her bedtime stories. Still, compared to Anderson's and the Grimm brothers' tales, Beatrix's stories ranked just a bit lower in her heart. After getting off the train, they were immediately greeted by a horse-drawn carriage. The driver, recognizing the group, removed his hat and bowed. Even in this modern age of advanced transportation, the tradition of horse-drawn carriages remained stubbornly alive. The Islama family had deliberately arranged for such a carriage. A clear symbol of a Magus family's resistance to modern science. The carriage, large enough for four, was drawn by 4 horses. Outside of royal events, it was an uncommon sight. The Islama family, though merely a branch, clearly wished to flaunt their heritage as traditional Magus nobility. Surprisingly, the ride was incredibly smooth. Even on the rough mountain road, it was more comfortable than a car, with almost no jostling. It was likely enchanted with some form of levitation midcraft. Intrigued, Karan asked Shiomi about the rune formula behind it during the ride. Shiomi casually explained, turning the carriage into an impromptu lesson in magecraft. Rains was stunned, watching the two hold a full-blown magic lesson without a care for their surroundings. But it was exactly this kind of uninhibited Magus style that had led her to accept her brother's request and invite Shiomi to be her private tutor. By the time the twin towers by the lake came into view, Karan had more or less mastered the technique. That must be the twin towers. Karan gently tucked a lock of hair behind her ear as she looked out at the lakeside buildings. They weren't particularly tall by modern standards. Maybe 4 stories at most. But their oddly tilted, symmetrical structures gave them a striking resemblance, hence the name. Sometimes the family that managed the land was added to the name, making them the Twin Towers of Islama. The one to the east is the Tower of the Sunday, the one to the west is the Tower of the Moon. Shiomi remained laid back as ever. So was Karan. Their composure only made Rains and Gray seem more on edge. Of course, Gray's tension came from the anxiety of being in unfamiliar territory. Completely different from Rains's concerns. After all, a Magus's home is their stronghold. Their workshop, naturally, even more so. And when it came to the outer grounds, they could be just as fortified. There was no telling if a handful of dust or a breath of air might turn hostile toward uninvited guests over the slightest provocation. That was exactly why Rains had confirmed Shiomi's travel plans and chosen to accompany him. The carriage came to a halt in front of the western tower. The Tower of the Moon. After everyone disembarked and collected their luggage, the carriage and coachman vanished before their eyes like something out of a fairy tale, leaving behind only a small toy soldier and a toy carriage. Impressive magecraft. No doubt a creation of the Department of Creation, Shiomi praised without reservation. Your compliment honors me, came a deep, composed voice. A well-groomed gentleman, likely in his 40s or 50s, stood at the tower's entrance and gave a respectful bow. He had a full head of gray-streaked hair and wore a vermilion suit. A cane supported his hand. Perhaps due to difficulty walking. Byron Valuala Islama, Shiomi said, stating the man's name. It is an honor that you still remember me, Mr. Shiomi, Byron replied with sincere courtesy. Even as a branch family member, and even if Shiomi was merely associated with Inarai, Byron treated him with utmost respect. He turned and bowed to Rains as well. Welcome, Miss Almeloy. So it's the head of the Islama family. My apologies for not greeting you sooner, Rains replied with as much formality as she could manage. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Byron smiled and gestured toward the tower's entrance. "Please, come in. The banquet has already begun." Following Byron's lead, they entered the banquet hall. The hall's high ceiling radiated a solemn brilliance. Plush carpets softened every step, thick enough to sink into. The cold air was crisp, yet pleasant. The mingling shadows of guests chatting and laughing painted a scene straight out of a dream. Everyone here was a magus. Truly, a gathering that felt like a fantasy come to life. "You're free to do as you like," Shiomi said before being immediately surrounded by several magus looking to strike up a conversation. Someone even handed him a glass of red wine. Karin sighed. It was clear they'd have to move about on their own. She turned to Gray. "If you're not comfortable, just stick with me." "I don't really know anyone here," Rains murmured as she let Tremaw follow beside her, scanning the crowd. Most of the attendees were from the Trambalia and Meloasta factions, with barely anyone from Bartom Eloy. Roughly 60% belonged to the democratic-aligned Trambalia, 10% to the aristocratic Bartom Eloy, and the remaining 30% to the neutral Meloasta. For someone like El Meloy, still formally part of the aristocratic faction, this was practically enemy territory. "What a shame. I thought El Meloy was still aristocratic," Karin teased. "Why not take this chance, now that you're studying under my father, to cut ties with them?" "I'll consider it. If your father ever manages to wipe out the entire aristocratic faction," Rains replied, naming a condition that was practically absurd. After all, breaking from a faction wasn't something that could be done on a whim. Leaving would invite retaliation from her original faction, and the others wouldn't necessarily offer support. They might even sit back and profit from the chaos. At its core, the divide between the aristocratic and democratic factions lay in how they believed the clock tower should be governed, by noble bloodlines or by talented individuals regardless of lineage. El Meloy's faction had long been criticized by Bartom Eloy, especially due to the influence of the classroom established by El Meloy II, which align more closely with democratic ideals. There was also the matter of Inurai once intending to bring Shiomi into the Valuala family by marrying him to a young woman in the clan. Instead, Shiomi ended up adopting Karin and Sakura. And when he returned to the clock tower years later, he brought a wife back to London with him. Faced with that outcome, even someone as politically savvy as Inurai had no choice but to abandon the plan. Now that's a dangerous thing to say. What if my father suddenly gets suspicious? Karin raised an eyebrow. Rains, are you trying to throw the entire clock tower into chaos? Then I can only pray the flames of war don't reach me, Rains replied with a wicked grin. As they joked, a venomous voice cut through the air. Oh? Do you really think that with such shallow bloodlines, you can leave any mark on the noble history of Magecraft? An old, scheming magus from the aristocratic faction had begun hurling insults at the group surrounding Shiomi. Chapter 123, Generally, seasoned and cunning magus tend to be more discreet when debating or sharing their opinions, often masking sharp words with a veneer of politeness. But younger magus are far less restrained. Especially when drunk. And most of the guests invited to Islama's social gatherings were on the younger side. From the sound of it, are you saying the clock tower can manage just fine without the younger generation? Shiomi smiled faintly. Ha ha ha. The clock tower was built for lords. You lot get a few scraps and suddenly think you're something special? The alcohol was clearly fueling the magus's growing hostility. Shiomi responded with a casual shrug. If all nobles are like you, it's better to toss the whole lot into history's trash bin. What did you just say? It was clear Shiomi had pushed things too far. The young aristocratic faction magus was visibly provoked. In the world of Magecraft, strength speaks louder than anything else. If you look down on grassroots magus like us, why not demonstrate your family's legacy and power right here? Shiomi dramatically looked around, and others nearby nodded, echoing their agreement with murmurs of yeah, exactly. Then, without warning, his tone shifted as he delivered a bombshell. I've met plenty of nobles. But how do you measure up against the clock tower's child prodigy, the former Lord El Meloy? The crowd of magus who had been drawn in by the commotion immediately broke into hushed whispers. Tenkai Shiomi wasn't exactly a towering figure, but among the younger generation. Especially those from the democratic faction. Many were familiar with him. Those from the aristocratic faction had mostly only heard the name, with few chances to meet him. But the moment he mentioned the former Lord El Meloy, even those who hadn't known who he was immediately caught on. Back when Kenneth El Meloy Archibald was still alive, the aristocratic faction he belonged to had been one of the clock tower's premier noble houses. They were part of the Bartom Eloy faction led by the current Wizard Marshal and one of the few noble groups that maintain ties with the larger aristocratic faction. Now, that once proud noble house had fallen apart, reduced to little more than a name. And the cause was standing right here, an Eastern man. The man from the East. The former Elmeloi. Those two sentences combined were enough to make most aristocratic faction magus shudder. The once lively hall plunged into a chilling silence. While it wouldn't escalate into a full-blown magecraft duel, a few younger magus from the democratic faction couldn't help but secretly hope Xiaomi would decapitate a few more of the aristocratic faction's inflated egos. Ow, ow, ow. PFFT. PFFT, I'm sorry. A staggering figure stumbled through, slurring his words and lurching between Xiaomi and the aristocratic magus. A wine glass arced through the air. Xiaomi reached out and deftly caught the falling glass with his champagne flute. Steady, not a drop spilled. Unfortunately, no one paid attention to his smooth move. The drunken young man who had broken attention lay sprawled on the floor, reeking of alcohol, his presence making everyone uneasy. The banquet had barely started, and he was already hopelessly drunk. The unpleasant scene instantly killed the mood. The antagonistic noble magus turned and walked away. The democratic faction magus who had gathered around Xiaomi quickly dispersed as well, not wanting to be near the drunkard. Only Xiaomi remained, holding two different wine glasses, gazing indifferently down at the pale-faced young man. How drunk are you really? Did you drink that much, or is it magecraft? Xiaomi smiled. I'm guessing it's the latter? Ah, nothing escapes your eyes, does it? The young man got to his feet and pulled two pills from his suit pocket. This one makes you instantly drunk, and this one's the sobering pill. As he spoke, he swallowed one of them. In less than 10 seconds, the reeking stench of alcohol that seemed to ooze from every pore vanished completely. You mean? Xiaomi asked. Breshisen. My name is Mayo Breshisen Kleinex. Oh, Xiaomi let out a soft sound of interest. Breshisen was a prestigious name. While they didn't hold the top-tier authority of the Bardam Eloi, their lineage stood tall in both historical significance and research achievements. A textbook example of the neutral faction. Given the Breshisen name as his middle name, it meant Mayo was either a direct member or under their patronage. Xiaomi figured he was most likely from a branch family, but just the presence of someone from Breshisen made it clear how significant this Twin Towers gathering really was. But I didn't expect to run into the infamous noble slayer here. What an honor. Mayo's complexion remained pale. Apparently naturally so. He wore a smile as he flattered Xiaomi, but when he reached for the wine glass, his hand missed. Where did that ridiculous nickname come from? Xiaomi's eye twitched. Even a blind man could tell he was annoyed. Bebet. You really did kill the previous Elmeloi in a direct one-on-one fight during the Holy Grail War 9 years ago. No, almost 10. Mayo fumbled his explanation. Before he could finish, a new voice gently interrupted. Mayo. The voice was soft and familiar. If you know you're facing the noble slayer, maybe keep quiet. Otherwise, you might end up another notch on his belt. Xiaomi handed the wine glass back to Mayo, then turned and smiled at the newcomer. So the rumors were true. You really did come, Tuco. His tone shifted to a familiar warmth, completely different from the polite distance he kept with Mayo. Your sealing designation's been lifted. It's been a few years now, Tuco Ozaki replied with a smile. Well, that's good news. Xiaomi shrugged. Your teacher once said if losses on the front lines kept up, she'd have to send me back to deal with sealing you again. Tuco chuckled. That would have been awful. I'd hate to run into a rune magus like you. What kind of teacher's scared of their own student? Xiaomi teased. That only made Tuco more amused. She played along with his banter. Isn't that exactly what they mean by the student surpasses the teacher? Though both knew the truth, Tuco kept up the act, continuing to play the role of Xiaomi's rune magecraft mentor. At that moment, cheers erupted from the back of the hall, drawing the three of them to look. At the far end stood a spiral staircase leading to the second floor. On the terrace-like upper level stood a pair of maids who looked exactly alike, as if they were twins. Their flawless features could easily lead one to mistake them for the Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver. It was clear. The real Princess of Gold and Princess of Silver were about to make their entrance. Chapter 124, After the two maids lifted their skirts and curtsied, they each called out in unison behind them. Miss Deirdre. Miss Estella. The figures in purple gowns emerged from the shadows. Time shattered. In that moment, all sensation vanished. So completely that even the concept of an instant felt meaningless. Xiaomi watched the two women with quiet detachment. He understood perfectly why the hall had fallen completely silent. Their eyes, gazing down from above, shimmered like gemstones from ancient myths. Their noses seemed sculpted by an artist who had staked their soul on perfection. Their lips carried the unaging light of youth, evoking petals from a long-lost paradise. And yet, even such praise paled before these two. The Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver. Xiaomi looked around. Some magus were so stunned they'd forgotten to grip their wine glasses. Red wine spilled across their shoes. Others held their breath so tightly they were nearly suffocating. A few had already dropped to their knees in tears. So this is their method of reaching the root, Shiomi said, casting a glance at Tuko beside him. She took off her glasses. That was the trigger she had designed to switch between the two personas she created for herself. Without the glasses, Tuko Ozaki became a magus cold to the core, stripped of all humanity. Izluma does have a deep legacy, but I didn't expect even you, a grand, to be this shocked, Shiomi said, lips curling slightly. Looking at the glasses in her hand, Tuko turned away, ignoring the self-introductions from Diadra and Estella. If you put it like that, you seem completely unfazed. At that, she put her glasses back on. This isn't a great place to talk. Shall we go somewhere else? After you. Shiomi caught sight of Inarai and realized Tuko was deliberately avoiding her. After exchanging a brief word with Mayo, she and Shiomi quietly turned and left the venue, leaving the others still mesmerized by the presence of Diadra and Estella. They arrived at the lake beside the Twin Towers. The setting sun cast a richer glow over Tuko's red hair. Izluma went to great lengths to prepare Diadra and Estella, but they didn't impress you at all. If Mr. Byron found out, I bet he'd be heartbroken, Tuko said with a chuckle. I'm not interested in the route, Shiomi replied casually. Words that amounted to heresy in the world of Magus. Then why did you enter the Holy Grail War? Tuko asked again. You asked me that 5 years ago, Shiomi replied, smirking. What I wanted was the Grail's wish-granting power. Wealth, fame, influence. It's all convenient. Unfortunately, it got corrupted, so I had to play the good guy and clean the Greater Grail. Tuko nodded in understanding. It's been a few years, but looks like you've picked up another daughter? Don't tell me you've got a thing for adopting little girls. Don't be ridiculous, Shiomi clicked his tongue. I was asked to take care of her. She's about the same age as my own, so having her live with us is better than keeping her in the Clock Tower's dorms. He paused, giving her a once-over. You've settled down too, I see. A little later than you, Tuko replied. What Shiomi meant by settled down was her current appearance. Though she'd been a grand for over a decade, she still looked like a vibrant woman in her early 20s. Many magus were skilled at maintaining youth, but that wasn't the case for either of them. They were fixed. Not just in appearance, but in presence. In every conceivable way. Anyone who saw Tuko would assume she was in her early 20s. Likewise, anyone who met Shiomi would instinctively take him for a greenhorn barely 20. Or not even that. Like the noble-aligned magus earlier, who tried to provoke Shiomi at the gathering, assuming he was younger and therefore not worth the effort. But their fixed points in time were different, as were the means. Shiomi figured Tuko had locked her time around when they'd first met formally. Likely due to her own level of magecraft. As for him, his time had probably frozen long ago, back in the land of shadows. Just like his master, Skathak. To be honest, it's a headache for me too. Shiomi rubbed his head. Because I've been fixed like this, Sakura's respect now comes purely from the bond we've built over more than a decade. As for Karin, she basically treats me like I'm just a few years older than her. Haha, looks like your life isn't so easy either, Tuko said with a grin. At that moment, Shiomi extended his hand, palm up, in front of her. Just as a famous jest drifted out from within the Twin Towers. Dancing by the lake is definitely rare, but if it's your invitation, I suppose. Tuko said playfully, reaching out her hand. But Shiomi lightly slapped it away. Cut it out. I came to collect the money you owe me. He shot her a fierce glare. You had enough to run off to England. Paying back a bit of your debt shouldn't be impossible, right? Tuko withdrew her hand with mock regret. Sorry, I'm broke at the moment. Her blunt reply made Shiomi withdraw his hand with a sulk. But Tuko's tone suddenly shifted. If you can show me a few more primordial runes I haven't managed to decode yet, I might consider scraping some money together. You're not seriously saying that right now, are you? Shiomi shot her a sideways glance. Half joking, half serious. Tuko was utterly casual. I mean, rebuilding the Rune Magecraft Foundation and decoding several lost primordial runes. I didn't think much of it at the time, just sold the rights to the clock tower. Still, they're accomplishments I can be proud of. But then one day, a magus claiming to be her student, someone who had learned Age of Gods Rune Magecraft from her, appeared. Naturally, Tuko went to check him out. What she discovered was that he hadn't acquired the patents she sold to the clock tower. Instead, he possessed all 18 authentic primordial runes. More precisely, he held a genuine foundation of Age of Gods magecraft. To cover that up, Shiomi had always deliberately suppressed the power behind his magecraft during battle, presenting everything in the form of high-level spells. Tuko's interest in his complete set of primordial runes wasn't anything new. But before Shiomi could respond, someone came running out of the venue toward them. It was Rains. Sorry to interrupt your conversation. Something's happened. Rains looked at Shiomi. Karin isn't doing well. Chapter 125, The Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver left the terrace after only a fleeting appearance. There was no interaction between them and the other magus. After all, if they stayed any longer, some of the younger ones might lose their minds just from sensing something so close to the root. Take Karin, for instance. She wasn't a top-tier magus, and her troublesome masochistic spiritualist constitution didn't help. Under the protective runes cast by Shiomi, that condition had been suppressed as much as possible. Externally, at least. I didn't expect them to break through from the inside. I underestimated the Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver, Shiomi muttered as he gently brushed aside Karin's bangs to reveal the bruising beneath. Karin lay with her head on Shiomi's lap, several similar marks visible on her cheeks and body. The bruises at the corners of her eyes and mouth looked so real that anyone unfamiliar might have thought she'd been beaten. But these weren't wounds. They were stigmata. In a sense, they were proof of her qualifications to be baptized by the Holy Church. I'm fine, Karin said softly. She had collapsed not long after Shiomi had left the hall. Fortunately, Gray had been nearby, and she was quickly brought to a guest room in the Tower of the Sunday. The Tower of the Moon, by contrast, was reserved for the Islama family. Now lying on a bed so soft it felt almost weightless, Karin didn't feel too bad. Especially with Shiomi still at her side. The overwhelming beauty of the Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver had delivered a shock akin to the swirl of the root itself. Without meaning to, it had placed a burden on her body. I misjudged how deeply Islama's results could affect Magus, Shiomi said as he placed his hand on her head, channeling the gentlest magic to ease the strain from her condition. I'm sorry you had to go through this. It would take some time for the deeper marks to fade completely. It's all right. I was a child who should have been abandoned, but father kept me by his side. Karin shook her head gently. You did everything he could for me. If even a small oversight like this deserves blame, how many parents in this world could be considered praiseworthy? Still, it was unexpected. The first time her masochistic spiritualist constitution had flared up wasn't from a spiritual source, but from the sheer beauty of the Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver. It's fine. I'll stay here with you, Shiomi said, taking her hand. I'll leave after you fall asleep. Karin shifted a little closer into his arms. Even though I'm already this old, let me be spoiled just this once. Shiomi chuckled. You've got a lot of nerve. You've never acted spoiled, not once growing up. Because. Karin smiled too. There was never any need. People act spoiled to get things they normally wouldn't have. But back then, neither Sakura nor I ever had to. She turned her head to glance at Gray, who was sitting nervously on the sofa. The Gravekeeper was fidgeting with his hands, anxiously clasping and shifting them in patterns that looked like Buddhist mudras or intricate string figures. Don't just focus on me. There's still a child who needs your attention, Karin murmured. Wrapped in the gentle flow of mana surrounding her body, the heaviness eased, and the pain began to feel like nothing more than a fleeting dream. No, really, I'm fine, Gray said quickly, shaking her head. It's just. Ever since I saw the Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver, I've been feeling unsettled. Why would anyone create people so beautiful? The beauty of the Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver was obviously unnatural. Anyone could tell it was something only achievable through magecraft. Because beauty is the domain of magecraft, Shiomi replied. Mathematical harmony is essential for magic circles and workshops. But Islama, or rather, Valuala, approaches it from a more fundamental perspective. Karin added, in the end, magecraft is just a byproduct of the pursuit of the root. The joy of touching the supernatural, of becoming something beyond human, is its own reward. It's because humanity is so weak that we yearn for things beyond reason. But that's not where the ultimate goal lies. Most modern magus understand the root is out of reach. Magecraft has been in decline since the Age of Gods, and those who move backward in time find no reward. Today, even the fifth magician, perhaps the last, has emerged in the Far East, and the door to the root is all but closed. But Mr. Shiomi seems completely unaffected, Gray remarked. Well? Shiomi opened his mouth to answer, then hesitated. The Land of Shadows. A place that existed outside the world itself, different from the Throne of Heroes and the Counterforce, yet still capable of reaching the root. To Shiomi, the root was as natural and close as the air he breathed. As someone whose essence belonged to the Age of Gods, he simply couldn't be interested in something always within reach. It's just not something he could care about, Karin said with a knowing smile. Or rather, if he were interested, that would make him a fraud. Gray nodded, not quite grasping the meaning. As for Valuala, they believe that by pursuing ultimate beauty, one's soul can be elevated instantly to a higher dimension, Shiomi continued, returning to the earlier topic. It's a Magus's way of expressing the idea that the appreciation of beauty can elevate the soul. Even something incomplete beauty approaching perfection can stir a Magus's soul with overwhelming intensity. Karen's masochistic spiritualist constitution had been triggered by just such a stimulus. Her soul had been touched, and the reaction came from within. Just as Shiomi was about to explain more to Gray about the aesthetics of magecraft, he sensed two unfamiliar presences drawing near from outside the room. "May I come in?" A vaguely familiar voice called out. "Come in," Shiomi replied, recognizing it as the voice of one of the maids who had introduced the princesses earlier. The door opened a crack, revealing the hallway. One of the maids who had accompanied the Princess of Gold and the Princess of Silver stood there. "My name is Karina," she said, holding a lantern in one hand and offering a polite curtsy. "No need for formality. Please, come in." Shiomi looked past her toward the shadow behind and extended the invitation. He assumed it was the head of the Izlama family came to pay a visit and thought little of it. But when that figure stepped out of the darkness, even Shiomi was caught off guard. For a moment, he couldn't think of the reason for the visit. The Princess of Gold. To what do I owe the honor? Chapter 126, Facing the Princess of Gold at such close range, Denkai Shiomi finally understood why the Magus at the banquet had lost their composure so completely. In the flickering candlelight, her beauty felt almost detached from reality. "Good evening. I apologize for the late visit," said the Princess of Gold. Even her voice seemed to carry a magic that could stir the brain. This was the extreme beauty that the Izlama family had pursued for generations, vividly proving what it meant for beauty to become a form of violence. "Miss Deirdre wishes to speak with you," said the maid, Karina. "With us?" Shiomi raised an eyebrow. Karen had already closed her eyes, relying on sound to gather information. She knew full well that if she kept looking at the Princess of Gold, even her magic circuits would begin to fall out of sync. But shutting her eyes only sharpened her hearing, and even that was enough to make her feel uneasy. Thankfully, the gentle magic enveloping her hadn't ceased, keeping her from suffering any serious effects. "I'm sorry, but could this young lady step out for a while?" Karina asked, turning to Gray. Gray stood up at once, ready to leave. "Gray is someone we trust," Shiomi said. "If she leaves, then Karen would have to leave too." Since the Izlama family already knew who Karen was, and Shiomi had made his stance clear, the Princess of Gold didn't press the issue. "In that case, Karina, please step out for now." "As you wish." Without hesitation, the maid bowed and left the room quietly, even masking her presence so well that even Shiomi felt she was barely noticeable. After Gray closed the door, she stepped aside and offered the sofa to the Princess of Gold. She too preferred not to be too close to Deirdre. "Forgive me for intruding so suddenly," Deirdre said politely. "It's no trouble," Shiomi replied. He had only been here taking care of Karen, and would have received any visitor, let alone the host of tonight's event. But more importantly, your hearing. Is it impaired? So you noticed. The Princess of Gold touched her ear gently. "Due to a genetic condition, I was born without hearing. I learned to read lips to follow conversations. As for speaking, that came through magecraft. Modern science had made many things once achievable only through magecraft more accessible. But even as the 21st century began, direct communication with the brain remained something still outside scientific reach. For Valuala, however, high-level magecraft of that kind was far from difficult." Shiomi nodded, no longer surprised. "We were invited to Izlama today and had planned to leave by evening, but Karen suddenly fell ill." He offered his thanks. "I'm grateful your house provided such a comfortable room for her to rest." The Princess of Gold remained gracious, showing no arrogance despite her flawless appearance. "Not at all. My father has spoken of your close ties with the Lord of Valuala. Everyone in our house agrees. It's thanks to talents like you that we've gained more influence against those outdated aristocrats." Of course, it wasn't just influence. Bartum Eloi, who controlled the Department of Policies, held more power than both Trumbelio and Valuala factions combined. But at this point, the Democratic faction had gained a slight edge in influence. Largely because the aristocratic faction had failed to produce a magus capable of matching Shiomi. Shiomi, used to such praise, found himself growing wary. He feared being placed too high on a pedestal, worried he might one day forget to keep his feet on the ground. "I have a favor to ask." After the formalities, the Princess of Gold went straight to the point. "Please, go ahead. If it's within my power, I'd be glad to help," Shiomi replied without hesitation. Maintaining good relations with Valuala was a necessary move. "I want to ask you, Mr. Shiomi, will you help us escape?" "Escape? From the Izlama family?" Shiomi narrowed his eyes, making no attempt to conceal his suspicion. "Don't forget, I'm with Valuala. I don't make decisions like betrayal on a whim." "I expected you to be doubtful." A shadow crossed the Princess of Gold's expression. But we have our reasons. Oh? I want to protect my younger sister. Estella, the one who inherited the title of Princess of Silver, Deirdre said plainly. Her sincerity softened Shiomi's caution, if only slightly. Protect her? As the treasured heir of the Islama family, you're asking an outsider for help? The question hit too close. Deirdre fell silent, not because she didn't want to answer, but because something heavier had gripped her words. Shiomi lowered his gaze, checking on Karin, and quietly waited for Deirdre to gather herself. Where? Just tired. She raised her hand and placed it over the chest of her gown, embroidered with purple rose thorns. Mr. Shiomi, you're one of the leading magus of your generation. You should understand how much king went into creating these bodies. This time, Shiomi said nothing. For magus, reshaping the body was routine. Among ancient noble magus families like Islama, drug therapies, magic grass transplants, even organ and brain modifications were common. All in pursuit of the ultimate magecraft. In a way, Shiomi was no different. Training in the land of shadows was its own form of transformation. Ordinary humans lost their qualification to endure it the moment they stepped in. If there was any real difference, it was this. While Shiomi often griped about how grueling the land of shadows was, he had never once hated a moment of it. Looking at the flawless results that were Deirdre and Estella, most magus would accept any price. Islama was, after all, part of Valuala. Nothing about it was out of place. That's why Shiomi remained silent. Not because the cruelty of the magecraft world was hard to put into words, but because... Please don't misunderstand. We are magus too. We're prepared to offer ourselves for the cause. But our father's methods... They're no longer efficient. No. He's long since past the point of efficiency. So we have the right to protect ourselves. Clearly, the Princess of Gold understood what Shiomi was thinking. And for the sake of her goal, she didn't bother to hide the truth. Chapter 127, What the Princess of Gold said was indeed true. When magecraft reaches a certain stage, its underlying theories can suddenly break down. Many magus families that had endured for centuries were wiped out simply because they failed to anticipate the exact moment their techniques would become obsolete. Then it's no surprise, Shiomi said, looking at the Princess of Gold. Islama's ritual has become dangerous enough that you've had to consider self-defense. But Mr. Byron won't listen to your warnings. You're absolutely right, the Princess of Gold nodded deeply. At this rate, either my sister or I will surely die when the ritual fails. To devote oneself to magecraft. That was the resolve shared by the noble magus of the clock tower. But the fact that the Princess of Gold had come to an outsider for help, simply because she didn't want to die pursuing magic, meant that Islama's magecraft had already crossed the line. It was no longer refined and efficient, but a fuse waiting to ignite, destroying generations of accumulated achievements. Still, instead of going to Miss Inarai, the head of your household, you came to me. Shiomi trailed off, feeling a twinge of hesitation. Because you're different from Mother Magus, Mr. Shiomi, the Princess of Gold said plainly. Among magus, moral virtue wasn't a prerequisite. Those who claimed that humanity should transcend magecraft had no place as leaders. Yet Tenkai Shiomi was well known within the clock tower. Partly because he was one of those rare individuals who consistently placed humanity above all else. If that were all, he would have been mocked. But the magus he had trained, like Karin and Sakura, were among the most gifted of their generation. So while most magus disagreed with his ideals, they found it hard to argue against the results. Shiomi had never expected that, one day, someone would come to him seeking help precisely because of that reputation. Clearly, the Princess of Gold had done her research. She understood Shiomi's principles well. If someone in danger, who posed no threat, appeared before him, he wouldn't just stand by and watch them die. I'm busy, but helping you isn't out of the question. Hiding a few people isn't hard for me, Shiomi said, slouching his shoulders. But like I said earlier, I'm aligned with Valuala. If Lady Inarai comes asking why I did this, I can't exactly say I was swayed by your beauty. It was a practical concern. But even the Princess of Gold didn't believe that excuse. A magus who wasn't interested in the Islama family's magecraft, nor moved by the sister's overwhelming beauty, wouldn't be able to face Lord Valuala with such a flimsy justification. Of course. I'm not coming empty-handed, the Princess of Gold said. To get a magus like Mr. Shiomi to act, naturally we've prepared a fitting reward. What kind of reward? Shiomi asked with interest. A reward that can resolve your most pressing concern, she replied, rising from the sofa. I know your daughter is going to participate in the upcoming Fifth Holy Grail War, and I also know some things haven't been properly prepared. Then she added, please come to my room tomorrow morning. The tower's back door will be open, and the room is sealed with a magical lock. No one else will be able to enter. We'll talk about the Princess of Silver then. With that, Deirdre left the room. Xiaomi couldn't help but chuckle. She had clearly come prepared. What surprised him most was that she even knew Sakura's holy relic hadn't been fully arranged yet. She'd certainly done her homework. Father really knows how to charm the ladies. The Princess of Gold, whom none of the guests had ever seen before, actually came to visit us. Help her escape, won't you? Karin opened her eyes and glanced slyly at Xiaomi. In another situation, this would sound like a cue to elope. I wonder what mother would think if she found out? What are you even saying? Don't be ridiculous. Xiaomi smiled as he gently ruffled Karin's soft, slightly wavy silver hair. I have no interest in artificial constructs. The Izlama family's achievements don't even compare to a single strand of your hair. Karin gave a quiet smile. I hope you say that in front of the magus of the clock tower next time. You just want to watch the drama unfold, don't you? Xiaomi smirked. At that moment, Gray spoke up. So, do you think the Princess of Gold genuinely wants your help to escape? That's a good question. You can't judge things by appearances alone. Even if her reasoning and logic are sound, I can't completely dismiss the idea that this is Valuala testing me. After all, I've been Rains's tutor for quite some time. It's only natural that voices within the faction might question my position, which could have prompted Lord Valuala to orchestrate something like this, Xiaomi said, praising Gray's insight. But the Princess of Gold said she had prepared something very important for Sakura, Karin added. It must be a holy relic, something that meets her needs. I heard that Izlama acquired a particularly valuable magecraft tool at an underground auction. She even clashed with a new magecraft noble from the Middle East who was planning to join the Fifth Holy Grail War, Xiaomi analyzed slowly. If that's the item in question, then it's definitely suspicious. It was purchased under the Izlama family's name, so it's hard to believe the Princess of Gold would be allowed to use it for personal purposes. Gray looked a bit concerned. So, it's a trap after all?